We'd just like to say that these podcasts were recorded prior to the COVID-19 UK lockdown.
The Thinking Tackle Podcast.
Nice when people used to write letters, isn't it?
Yeah.
I used to have correspondence with a guy called Van Ingen who used to fish for Massir, a Danish guy who lived in Mysore. And he used to write to me, and it was amazing. It's so exciting to get the letter with the airmail, the blue airmail letter and envelope with the Indian stamp. Yeah, the internet's great, but it's taken all that away. It's like you never send anyone a postcard now, do you?
I know. Why don't we do that?
Yeah.
It's just personal, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the same with books and magazines and all that nowadays as well. It's still nice to actually be able to own something.
No, I don't want a Kindle. I mean, I'll give a book away after I've read it, but I can't do with a Kindle.
No, I've tried. I like listening to audiobooks and stuff.
Oh, audiobooks, brilliant, because again, the voice, that's what makes it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know if I told you, the first audiobook I ever listened to, I was on my way back from fishing Lac de Der probably 30 years ago, and I'd got the Daily Telegraph were doing an offer, and somebody at work had belonged to the book club or whatever, and the first audiobook, and it was The Old Man and the Sea by Charlton Heston, and I was listening it driving home from Lac de Der on my own. And I pulled up outside my house in Twickenham about 2:30 in the morning, absolutely exhausted. And I carried on listening to it to the end because it was read by Charlton Heston, and it was just spellbinding and brilliant.
Yeah, I've listened to a few. By the way, Nigel Botherway, we're live. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Are you familiar with all of this a little bit?
A little bit, but your studio is probably a bit posh than the one I'm used to. It's nice for me to be in the guest chair rather than steering it. So,
is it that much different to talkSPORT, the studio?
I suppose the biggest difference is we're not live.
Yeah.
That's the biggest difference. And you're in the same room as me. It's nice having someone in the room. I always envy the other presenters at talkSPORT because nearly all the other shows are two presenters, whereas, there's me and then there's the glass and the producer, the other side of the glass. But yeah, it can be quite a lonely place in there on your own.
Yeah. Do you like it when you've got a few extra people in the studio with you? Could you ever get that?
I used to. When we were on talkSPORT, you do a handover, you'd have someone come in to read the news, and you do a handover with the presenter of the previous show and whoever's coming in next. When in the early days when Mickey Quinn was regular in the mornings, he really liked jokes, and we'd always tell each other little jokes. So if I got a good little funny text or something, I'd save it for the last few minutes of the show. When he came in, I'd say, "Here, Mickey, you can read this one out." And so that bit of banter and interaction was good.
Yeah, we like that, Tobe, don't we?
Yeah, we have some good banter.
Yeah, I like bringing Tobe into the podcast. Anyway.
He always surprises me. I'm never quite ready.
He's not ready to go, is he? But no, we like it. I think it fills the show up a little bit when you've got an extra voice.
No, I agree with you. Yeah. When I'm listening, I like it when Toby says something good. Again, if I'm surprised, Toby, you haven't been nicknamed Jamie after Joe Rogan's, tech operator, because Jamie's always sort of calling things up on the screen and that. And I think
I'll take that. That's a lovely compliment.
Well, exactly. I think we got a little bit of inspiration from that, Toby.
You're good. When I've been listening, you suddenly. Someone's talking about a capture of a carp, and miraculously you seem to pull the picture up. So yeah, it's great. It adds to it. It's teamwork.
No, it definitely. Like I say, we're getting used to using things in the studio a bit more now, so we can spontaneously put some stuff up, and just kind of go off on a bit of a tangent with it. So it's.
I've enjoyed teaching Simon the technical side of things.
I think that's what's nice about it for you. Like you say, you can go off at a tangent, whereas with me, I'm always looking at the clock. Because at talkSPORT, everything, you've got the ads, you've got the news, etc. And sometimes you might be talking, it might sound like I'm burbling a bit, but you're counting in your head thinking like 20 seconds to go, and you're trying to time your sentence to end on 19.9 seconds. So, yeah, it's nice to be able to go
practice.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah.
I suppose so.
I told you we were I was on a presentation course, a presenter course this week, and part of it was reading off an auto cue, which I know you've done, and having that earpiece in. And the earpiece thing is very, very distracting. That's it's getting used to hearing voices and people telling you when to round it up and stuff, especially if you're in mid-flight with a sentence. And it's like,
I think the earpiece is probably a bit easier because at least the person speaking in your ear is on your side and part of the team and helping you. I mean, the worst thing, Ali used to do some presenting shifts on tight lines. I used to do a live to camera piece every week called Fishery Focus, where I'd be out on a riverbank somewhere and you'd be telling people about the week's prospects or a great place to fish, and there you had the outside, like, you know, you'd always have the local loon coming down the towpath who's gonna, and you can see them coming, and you're trying to say what you know you've got to say, and no autocue, just doing it from memory, and you can see them, and you know they're going to walk straight in and start talking to you and interrupt, and it's amazing. We were having the conversation earlier how you could be saying something to camera while in your mind you're having a completely different conversation, and you're saying, oh, and prospects at Berry Hill are very good this week, there's tench coming out from the jungle to anglers fishing from the punt using sweet corn. Yet while your mouth is saying that and those words are coming, you're thinking, oh no, am I going to get this sentence finished without rushing it before he comes in and starts talking to us and walks straight in front of the camera? Then we're going to have to do it again before the next 747 comes in over Heathrow, and we have to wait for the noise. It's a funny old thing.
Have you had to learn that skill though? I mean, I know on our course we had to speak quite spontaneously into the camera, you know, just introduce someone, and actually doing it like this is quite natural. But when you're kind of having to introduce someone and introduce a subject that you don't necessarily know too much about, or just use a bit of random conversation, I find that really, really difficult to think of the words quickly. What about you?
I'm envious of you, because I worked as a freelance presenter on Tight Lines for 20 odd years. I've presented covering for Keith Arthur in the early days and doing the show myself. I've done Fisherman's Blues for 20 years, and I've never been on a presenting course for TV or radio in my life, so I'm quite envious of you.
It might be the last. It was you. Anyway, we're at the part of the show now. Do you know what I'm going to ask you now?
No, that sounds like a party trick game, but no, I don't.
I'm going to ask you, have you got a nice little gift for us, Nigel?
I've got 2 gifts for you.
That's very good. Thank you very much.
I've got 2 gifts for you.
One of the gifts actually is over there, actually.
Do you want me to run it over?
Yeah, let's do that, Toe. Yeah.
Toby's grabbed it already.
Yeah. So what's the first gift then, Nigel?
Well, this one, they're linked in a way, because this one been in a drawer at home and it's very close to my heart. I had to wrench myself to bring it here, and I nearly didn't for 2 reasons. One, because I wanted to keep it, and the other, I didn't want it to seem a bit vain. But that used to be me. But that is the 1993
Do you want to just hold that up to the camera there for the
That's
listeners
it, a bit
and
higher
viewers?
so we can all see it.
How's that looking, Tobe?
Yeah, that looks good.
That's the 1993 Daiwa catalogue, where I was on the cover holding a mahseer that I'd just caught in India. And it's funny because as a result of that photo, I was invited on before Tight Lines. It was Wire TV with little Nicky Horn. And I was invited on there to talk about foreign fishing. And it's funny because that probably led me to being on Tight Lines. And my second, there's a couple of other pictures in here actually. I'll show it to Toby. There's a picture of a salmon. Look at that. That was from the foot of Niagara Falls in Ontario, Canada.
How big was that, Nigel?
That was 28.12.
Was it? Wow.
At the time, that was my biggest salmon. Amazing fish. Used to love it, salmon. When, fun enough, just quickly before I give the other book, I started going to Canada carp fishing, and then I met a Canadian who was laughing at me fishing for oil drums and brown fish and what have you. He couldn't believe it when he saw I had an unhooking mat and things like that. He just put his boots on them to keep them still. And he said, oh, they're trash fish. And I said, oh yeah, what do you fish for? And he said, salmon. And winding him up and saying, oh, they're trash fish. And he said, right, come on, I'll take you salmon fishing. And we went that night, and I caught 3 20-pounders.
Wow.
Yeah, never known anything like it. And I said to him, well, yeah, you can stick your carp. And I just fished for salmon after that in Canada. We had some great adventures all over Canada and America fishing for it. Absolutely brilliant.
You continue doing that now as well. Do you still go out to America a bit in Canada?
I do. Not fishing for salmon anymore. Oh, God, don't talk to me about salmon. My mission now is, I've caught them in England, I've caught them in Ireland, but my mission now, I tried to put it off. I tried not to get addicted, but I've got to catch one from the River Wye on a fly.
Yeah, wow.
I'm booked in 2 weeks' time just over a week's time for the first day of the salmon season on the Wye. But whether the floods are going to recede in time...
That's got to be quite high at the moment, hasn't it, the Wye?
Oh, frightening. It was over 7 metres up. There's a beautiful little... I could give Jamie a photo of it. I got it on my phone, but there's a beautiful...
Jamie.
That nickname's going to stick now.
It's going to stick, yeah. Your mum and dad will tell me.
That's it.
A beautiful little old Indiana Jones type suspension bridge over the Wye at Simmons Yacht. And it is over 20 feet above the surface, and it got wiped out in the week.
Wow.
Yeah, tragic.
I think I went there on a school trip actually once.
Yeah, you probably did, because there's a campsite one side. No, it's like an Indiana Jones. When you walk over it, it'll swing slightly. You know, you couldn't drive over it, and you can just walk one abreast across it.
Right, yeah. I've seen that.
You know our mutual friend Sean Hodges?
Yeah.
Sean's petrified of heights. And there's a syndicate along there at the Bibblings, and he was offered a free ticket to the syndicate if he'd walk across the bridge, and he wouldn't do it.
Really?
Yeah.
So he's never got a chance to get on.
No, he hadn't.
Just going back to those catalogues, we don't see so much of that nowadays either, do we?
No, it's all online and video. And
digital,
I was showing it to you before, and the amazing thing is that was when Dyer was selling, had just launched the SS 3000 reels and the Dyer Amorphous AKN carp rods, yet there's only 3 pages of carp in the entire catalogue. It's incredible.
That's what we said, and that was 93 as well. So carp fishing was it was starting to get quite big then as well. I mean, that picture's great as well, isn't it? The colours on that actually looks like a painting, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's and it's too. It's funny how fate, because I'd taken pictures of that fish, and I was just letting it go, and I was just holding it in the current, ready to let it go. And I wanted to show my friend Steve, we go barbel fishing a lot, and I wanted to just show him the size of those pectoral fins. And as I was about to let it go, I just said to Dave Plummer, who I was with, I said, Dave, just take a picture looking down just to show those pectoral fins. And of course, this was in the days of slide film, and it wasn't until you got home you got them developed. Wow, what a photo, you know, whereas I was only doing it to show my mate Steve Glass, who I've fished with since I was 5, the pictures of the pectoral fins. And so that was a funny quirk of fate to get such a good picture. Then the second quirk of fate is, in those days you had to go and pick up, I can't remember what the place was called, it was called Europhoto in West Drayton or something, where you got your pictures developed. And I picked them up, and on my way back to work, couldn't help it, I was driving past tackle shop, stopped in, it was Hounslow Angling Centre in those days, dropped in there, and by coincidence John Middleton, who at the time was the UK boss of Daiwa, he was in the shop just on a shop visit. And I knew him from tench fishing and carp fishing, a syndicate up in Cambridgeshire. And so I knew John. And he said, oh, you look well, because, of course, I had a tan just back from 2 weeks in India. And I said, yeah, I've just been masseur fishing. He said, wow. And I went out to the car and I showed him the photos. And I showed him that photo. And he said, you've just cost me a load of money. And I said, why is that? And he said, because... And he showed me, he had the proofs to the Daiwa catalogue that were just going off to the printers. And he said, I'm going to get it redone. He said, that's going on the front cover.
Wow. Because you couldn't do any, you couldn't use Photoshop or anything on those pictures. So that print is exactly as it.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, you can see why you chose that, can't you?
Yeah, I wish you could Photoshop now, because I had dark hair in those days.
Yeah, me too, Nigel.
Yeah.
And so the other one.
Well, the other one is, tight lines, etc. I worked with Keith Arthur at Tight Lines for many times. He launched Fisherman's Blues on talkSPORT, which I covered for him when he was on holiday, etc. And then when he retired, I took on the gig. So I thought you, Toby, and you, Simon, I thought you'd enjoy. Very interesting. It's basically the history of talkSPORT, which just celebrated 20 years. So I think you'll enjoy that. There's the sort of ribald Alan Brazil drinking stories, along with the technical stuff.
I want to hear more about Alan Brazil later.
The technical stuff, which is amazing, of how they won the rights to get World Cups and the logistics of being in foreign countries and trying to get drunken people out of bed and what have you, but getting it is incredible, and beating people like Five Live to major awards. It's a really interesting read. I think you'll both enjoy it.
I will. I wish I read that before the podcast.
That'd be coming home with me, I'm afraid, mate.
Well, we're going to fight over that one, Toby.
And who's your money on?
Okay. He likes fighting more than I do. Nigel, I know you were talking about, when we have guests on the show, it's all about how people got into fishing and stuff like that. And you said when you were at school, you were a bit of a fighter at school, weren't you? Back in the early days. You seemed like such a gentle guy, and
I wouldn't say I was a fighter, but I didn't like bullies. I'd never start a fight, but I stupidly wouldn't shy away from one, which when you look back now, I think I told you, I had trouble at one school, and I wouldn't say I was expelled. I was asked to leave, and I was quite happy to leave because I wasn't happy there. And the school I then went to, people who know me, I started at Thames Valley Grammar School, which was a great school, and ironically I went on to play rugby for old Thamesians and what have you, but I didn't get on there. It was a rough time then, in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, height of skinheads, and it was very, very rough, and I didn't get on very well at Thames Valley.
So were you a skinhead?
Ish, yeah, Dr. Martens, Levi's, braces, Fred Perry, Ben Sherman, But we were too young to be the hardcore. But anyway, the thing that I always look back on now is you think, and I always encourage anyone to like speak to people, and I suppose it's a bit like, bullying campaigns and mental health campaigns, because you think, like when I got in trouble at Thames Valley, it wasn't my fault. And you think, why, like for instance, I remember we hadn't been there long. We're first years, and I can't remember now it's the second or the third years, but they rounded us all up, put us in the tennis court, and you're only allowed in when you paid your 10p protection money. And most people paid and got out, and there was 3 of us who we'd all been to junior school with, myself, Steve Glassett, Frank Harris, Pat Kavanagh might have been there, and we refused to pay, and we ended up getting in a fight with these second or third, I think they were second years. We're getting a fight.
So
with
weren't
them.
the teachers like?
No teachers around, it's 800 kids at the school, and we get in a fight with them, and then the teachers arrive, because it's like in the playground, bundle. And of course, day one or week one, you're labelled as a troublemaker because you've been fighting, and you're up in front of the headmaster, and you just stand there. And in those days, pathetic, used to give you lines. And it's funny because I often think that helped me in journalism, because it'd give you you had to write 12 sides on the inside of a table tennis ball, so you had to be quite inventive. But you look back now and you think, why didn't I just tell him what happened? Instead of, taking the punishment and being labelled a troublemaker. And
so
anyway,
why didn't you?
I can't tell you, because the funny thing is, when you look back at life, I often find you can remember events, but you can't remember emotions, and you can't really remember how you felt. And it seems stupid to not say what happened. But anyway, when I left there, I went to another school which was very rough, Rectory. Thames Valley was a grammar school. I think Rectory in those days they classified as a secondary modern. By the way, Mickey Gray went to Rectory, probably 10 years behind me.
Mickey Gray is coming on the podcast.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, and I'm always proud of him, because Rectory was a rough school. They didn't teach you much. And I think to have written a book, 2 books, and done as well as he has. But, again, when I turned up at Rectory, it was a rough school, so I start beginning of the 3rd year. And the first morning, some prefect or someone's trying to boss me around the playground. I get in a fight with him. And then at lunchtime or afternoon break, somebody said to me, there's a bundle round the back field after school. And you think, oh, yeah, who's that between? They said, you and some kid I've never heard of, because you're new and he wants to prove he's hard. And again, you think, you just sort of meekly follow the queue of kids going round to the back.
You can't really win, can you? Because if you back down, it's a sign of weakness as well. Yeah, but you look back and you think, why didn't I go and tell a teacher or something? Yeah. And I went round, and luckily I did all right, and I didn't get picked on after that. But no, I wouldn't consider myself a fighter. But some people I played rugby with. But it sounds like you've always had a bit of a sense of justice.
Yeah, definitely. Like when I played rugby, I was often captain, and my opposite number could kick me, punch me, gouge me, and it wouldn't particularly bother me. I'd just get on with it. But if you had a young new lad playing scrum half and someone punched him, then yeah, I probably would seek justice.
I probably would have wanted you as a friend at school, maybe. I think some of my friends at school were a bit bigger as well, actually, and I never had any trouble at school, probably because I probably had people like you around that. Yeah,
I'd like to think you sort of looked after people. Yeah, justice is probably a good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And I was one of those kids at school that some teachers could see the good in you. Like you had, I wouldn't say half and half, but some teachers thought I was the best kid at the school and could nurture that.
Right.
And others thought I was the worst kid at the school and should be chucked out and was,
Didn't you mention something about you stood up in front of the school and done a speech?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I give an example of talkSPORT. I'm very passionate about, teachers should be good. There was a great teacher, a science teacher I heard on Joe Rogan, who was saying when he speaks to teachers, he always says to them, trainee teachers, when he speaks to them, he says, when you're at school, right through your education system, school, college, tell me how many teachers, and I'll ask you this question, how many teachers made a positive impression on you, were really left their mark?
Okay,
go on.
One teacher.
Right, one. Toby?
Yeah, I've got one as well.
Yeah, and this science teacher said, that is the average answer, one. And he said, when I speak to teachers, I say, be that one. And I'll give 2 examples now. At talkSPORT, Matt Holland, I think he might have been captain of Republic of Ireland, top professional footballer. When he was at school, he was asked, they were all in the class, and the teacher said, I want you to write down your first 3 career choices. And of course, they wrote doctor, nurse, vet, policeman, firefighter, all the usual. And he wrote professional footballer, professional footballer, professional footballer. Do you know what the teacher told him? Don't be so stupid. Now, that's bad, teacher. Mark Cavendish, I love my cycling. Mark Cavendish, when he was at school, he wasn't doing very well. And the headmistress called him in and said, look, Mark, what we're going to do with you, what do you want to do when you leave school? And he said, I want to be a professional cyclist. And she said, okay, if you're going to be a professional cyclist, what team would you like to ride for? And he said, Der-Chantecoq. And she said, are they German? And he said, yeah. And she said, can you speak German? He said, no, miss. And she said, why don't we put you in for a German O-level? She did. He passed it, left school, got a ride for Der-Chantecoq. Rest is history. Became world champion, multiple stage winner of the Tour de France, Olympic medals, and that's the difference between a good teacher. And I was lucky, like you say, both of you. I had one who could, and he did something very clever because I was in trouble with something. I can't remember what it was, but I was in trouble and I was due to see the headmaster that afternoon. It wasn't going to be a good outcome. And in fact, at Rector, you used to get the cane. I mean, there's no politically correctness in those days. It was bend over, check you haven't got your exercise book down the back of your trousers, and you'd get 6 of the best hit as hard as they possibly could. Anyway, I'd written an essay, and surprise, surprise, I'd written it on fishing. Anyway, I'm due to see the headmaster, and then my English teacher called me in, Mr. Hudson his name was, and he said, Nigel, we're looking to enter somebody for the Borough Public Speaking competition. I think you could do it. And I'm like Kevin and Perry. I'm like, oh, sir, why me? You're so unfair. Why me? And like, last thing in the world you could think of is... And he said, listen, you're due to see Mr. Lever this afternoon, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, if I had a word with him and told him you were doing this, you might not have to see him this afternoon, or something along those lines. So basically I signed up to it thinking it's going to save me getting the cane. Yeah. And so I signed up to it and went along to the public speaking, and basically Mr. Hudson helped me. We rewrote my essay on fishing and my speech was on fishing, and I won. And the ironic thing was the Borough Public Speaking was held at Thames Valley Grammar School, the one I'd been chucked out of, and I didn't even let me in. And
how ironic.
There I was on stage, and there's the sort of some of the teachers and people from Thames Valley from when I was there, and there was it was judged by the mayor, who was a lady mayor. And I remember when they did the summing up, the speech went well, and when they did the summing up, she was talking about, praising, it sounds like I'm being big-headed now, but I'm just going down memory lane. She was praising the speeches, and she said, and the fisherman, he had me on the bank there with him. I was enthralled. And it was only probably years after, and I won, that I looked back and I thought, I think the reason I won was because I always quote, if I'm training young journalists, Lord Beaverbrook of the Daily Express Group, he used to say, I don't care what my staff say as long as they say it with passion. And I think I was probably the only entrant who had written his own speech and was speaking from the heart, whereas everybody else, the teacher had probably written for it, they'd memorised it, and it came across like that, whereas I was speaking from the heart. And it's ironic because you have turning points in your life that you don't realise they are at the time, whereas that probably gave me confidence. And I think deep down, when I was being a little scally, I always knew deep down I had great parents, and your parents are your biggest anchor in life, aren't they? You don't worry about other people, as you don't want to let your parents down. And I had those parents who you think they're too strict. I mean, my mum and dad have both been in the war, and you think they're too strict, but looking back, they probably weren't strict enough. And, I had a great relationship with both of them. And I always knew I'd be all right, but I think that was the turning point where I thought, and I decided that, I wouldn't leave at the end of the 5th and go and do an apprenticeship like all your mates did. I would go to college and I would try and,
Yeah, you probably wouldn't have seen that a few years previously to that. I've talked about teachers on the podcast before. What personal experience for you, Tobe? Have you got a teacher that stood out then?
It was actually my German teacher from secondary school. She's called Miss Capes, and a foreign language was something I never set out to do, but it was kind of similar to you. Time after time, I was kind of putting in some work, and it was coming back, and it was getting better, and suddenly I was speaking some German, but she had this kind of way of just helping you along, and then you suddenly, as you said before, it kind of like a turning point. I was thinking, actually, wow, I can speak a foreign language, but she just had this way of making it enjoyable, and like you said, throughout years of being at school, that's probably the one kind of thing that sticks with me. And I looked to carry it on after that, and I got to college and ended up dropping it because I didn't have that same kind of...
Can you imagine if you could have had the same sort of teacher?
I think teachers, parents, every kid has got a talent for something, and I think it just needs the right person to spot it and nurture it and encourage it. And again, I just thought of something else down memory lane. I remember we used to skive off school to go fishing. We didn't particularly like school, and we were always skiving off to go fishing, especially living near Bushy Park and the Thames. And again, one day our deputy head, Mr. Gilbert, remember he asked me to do something. I only just remembered this. It's funny. It's over 50 years ago. And I remember Mr. Gilbert asked me to do something I didn't want to do, and I was just about to protest. And he said, do you know, me and a couple of the teachers, we had lunch the other day. We had a lovely lunch. We sat outside in the garden at the Flower Pot in Sunbury, and we were looking across at the Thames, and there was these two young lads fishing. He said, one of them looked very much like you. I said, all right, I'll do it. And again, what great teaching. And I think, again, some of the better teachers, because you've got quite a strong personality at school, they realise, get you on side. And, like I remember we got in trouble once, and like you're up in front of the headmaster, the third time you've been in trouble this week. And I said, yeah, well, you know why, don't you? And he said, no, you enlighten me. And I said, well, because it's raining. Because when it was raining, we weren't allowed in the playground. We were like running around the classrooms and the corridors creating havoc. And he said, what do you suggest we do? And I said, well, would you let me start a table tennis club? And he said, but we haven't got a table. And I said, well, if I charge everybody to join the club and pay every week, we can buy a table, etc., etc. We started a table tennis club, and we didn't get in trouble when it rained anymore.
That's interesting, that as well, because you always assume that the teacher they've got their way, and they're right, it's my way and this is the correct way. But they probably do need they need the pupils on side, don't they? In the classroom.
Definitely.
And you only need one, like you say, one of the more bigger characters in the class to suddenly get on side, and
definitely. I know we're going off from fishing, but I heard the former education secretary, I can't remember his name, but he had been the education secretary, and I think he lives in America now, and he was on Desert Island Discs, and he was saying, you ask any parent who's got more than one children, and all their children are different. He said, yet you put 30, 40 in a classroom, and you expect to teach them all the same thing the same way. It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. No. My teacher, Mrs. Waterfield, I've mentioned her on the podcast before, it wasn't necessarily, she didn't find a specific skill with me, but it was just about trying to probably get some more confidence into me. And I probably didn't leave school with great qualifications, but I always refer back to her and think, well, but that teacher had a lot of faith in me. She pulled me aside from the rest of the class at times for whatever purpose. She probably thought that, well, he needs a little bit more support. And I think to this day now, I always refer back to that teacher and think, well, just remember that teacher, she had some faith in you, and it stood out, and it stays in your mind. And it's not necessarily just a question of what you've learned academically. It's what they've kind of ingrained into you, how you feel about yourself, which is really important as well.
100%. I often quote, I'll show it to Toby later. I keep it on my phone. I use it rugby coaching. I did a feature on Ian McGeechan, the former British Lions coach, and I've got a graphic of it that we used in a feature I did. But he actually quoted Alf Ramsey. And Alf Ramsey said, the players won't remember the team talks, they won't remember the matches, they'll remember the way you made them feel. And I think kids and adults are all very perceptive. And if it's like working here at Korda, if Danny didn't rate you, you'd know that and you'd feel small. Whereas if you get the pat on the back and you know he believes in you, you perform better. Yeah, when I used to coach kids at rugby, if they knew they were going to be the sub, when you put them on, they play badly. Whereas, if they know, if they think you believe in them, they'll play well.
Definitely. It's true. All that stuff about being, when you were at school and you had to sort of stand in a line and the two captains would pick, the people for their side. That was, you're laughing at that. It's brutal, isn't it?
It's brutal.
You're the last person to get picked.
Well, funny enough, I used to coach Hampton Hill Junior School Rugby Club, and the kids there taught me a great way to do it, because when we were at school, we did that pick up, or ib-dib and all that, 1 potato, 2 potato, but they called it Numbers King, and it's really clever. You get a random 2 players, you put one there, and then you number off. You give all the other players a number. And then, so say it's me, I'm organising it. I say, right, Simon, you stand over there. Toby, you stand over there. I number all the others off. You don't know what the numbers are. I say, right, Toby, you first pick any number 1 to 10. You say 3, and you might get the best player, or you might get the fat kid.
Yeah, that's a fair way to do it.
And it's a really good way of doing it. It's funny. Yeah, it's like 10, 11-year-old kids taught me that. It's fantastic.
But the problem is with that is when, like you said, if you got the kid that you didn't want, everybody would have that reaction.
Everyone's
number 4, you go,
no, not him.
So he has to go, all right, cheers.
The other way, the one I came to overcome that, one of the best games I invented is no one passes to that kid. So what I used to do, I used to play a game the first team to win is the first team that every player in their team scores a try. So they have to help each other rather than the greedy kid scoring 4 and the other kid not getting past 2.
That's really good. That's fair. Yeah. How much carp fishing do you do, Nigel?
I try and do one night a week during the early autumn, spring and summer.
Right.
And then in the winter, I'm on the rivers chasing roach and pike. But I love carp fishing. The sad thing about fishing is nowhere stays the same, does it? And it's trying to find good places to go. And I'm lucky. I've got a lovely little syndicate down in Sussex at the moment. Looks little bit like, your vision of, I've now fished it, but as a kid, it looks a little bit like your vision of what a carp pool, a red mire should look like, with, lovely overhanging trees, couple of them you can climb up. It's got lily pads, it's got rushes. On a summer's day, you can see a lot of the A-team cruising around on the surface, sort of, saying, is that the best you've got? And, your car's locked in, you're safe, you can walk around, leave your gear. But there aren't many places like that, are there?
They're disappearing, aren't they? Because you said you fished red mire did red mire live up to your expectations?
No, but it didn't let me down because I didn't go there for a long time. Because it sounds really anarchy, this, but when I was a kid, I remember I used to get my Angling Times delivered. And I was probably only about 13, and I had a picture of red mire on the bedroom wall. It was a feature they'd done. It didn't have any fish. It was just a picture of the pool. It was like a double-page pull-out of my Angling Times, and I literally had it sellotaped on my bedroom wall. And used to think I'd like to fish there one day. And the thing I look back on again, I remember. Here's a funny story. We used to skive off school for go fishing, and me and this lad called John Crossy, as we know him as, still fishes today. We skived off to go to one of the we were talking earlier about the Northern Angling Show and the big one. Well, I can't remember what it was called, but they used to have a fishing show at Fishmongers Hall in central London, and we skived off school, bunked on the train, and we went up, me and Crossy, to this show. And I can remember winning a set of photographs they had a casting competition. They had a little pool with polystyrene rings, and you had to cast and what have you. But anyway, we got. That must have been, we were about 13. A couple of years ago on talkSPORT, I happened to mention that story, and Crossy's dad was listening, and he must be the only person to get caught skiving off school 50 years later. It's incredible. But as an adult, I didn't want to go to red mire because I thought that bubble would be burst.
What year did you first go there?
But then by the time I did go there, which was only about 10 years ago, I was old enough to realise that it wasn't going to be the same. I'd seen photos, I'd seen films, and I just went there. Isn't it lovely to tread on, where Pitchford and BB and, and Walker and Yates, etc. had fished. But I wasn't expecting anything special. And it was a lovely pool, and it was lovely to fish, and it was lovely to catch a fish from. But, I didn't have the illusion burst because I'd already sort of deflated it myself, so to speak.
Are those small pools, they're your type of fishing generally anyway? Would you rather
No,
fish
I love big wild. I love, I used to go to France, I regret it. I had a long time not going to France because I'm stupid as well because I like my swimming, and I've swum across most of the lakes and rivers I've fished in around the world. I don't know who told me, I do. And I swam across the Orient. I fished the Orient in probably about, very, very early 90s. Swam across it and back for a bet.
How far's that across the Orient? That's miles, isn't it?
I can't remember now. It was over an hour across and back. It was, it was a long...
What, just for exercise?
Well, it's quite funny actually because I already used to swim across, and I remember knew a Dutch guy who was friends with Joe Taylor called Bertus, and he was a very keen carp angler, and I think Joe Taylor met him fishing in Holland on the canals, because in the early days that was one of the places English anglers used to go to, the canals, which of course people like Darryl like going to them again now. Yeah. But anyway, Bertus was there camping on the Orient, and he was fishing down the bank from me a bit, and he had I can't remember his niece or his granddaughter with him, and she was only about 14, and she was training for the Dutch Olympic team, and she wanted to go for a swim, but she was a bit worried. And I genuinely was going to swim across the lake. And I said, well, I'm going to swim across the lake in the morning if she wants to come with me. And I was sort of semi-joking, really. And I think at that time, I didn't even know she was training for the Olympics. I thought she just wanted to swim. Anyway, she turns up in the morning in her costume, towel under her arm, as if you're going to Hampton Pool.
Ready to go, wow.
Ready to go. So that was it. In we went. And Bertus, to be fair, we because you get, even in those days, you did get some speedboats, and I'm not that stupid. I've swum across silly rivers, but Bertus rode in the inflatable with us. It's just that we didn't, two little heads didn't get wiped out by a speedboat or something.
Did you never think you were putting yourself at a bit of risk then?
No, not. I would have felt that if I'd have felt responsible for her. I mean, the minute you got in, you could see she was like a fish. She was a brilliant swimmer. I don't think it was till we got out I found out that she was training for the Olympics. But we swam across and back. It was lovely. You
held your own with her then, did you?
Just about. I was younger then. I remember when I went to Raduta. I think we were about the second English anglers to go there, and you couldn't walk round the lake, and people were miles away. And I'd swim over to see them, swim across and back to go and see them. There wasn't any boat traffic, so you felt safe there.
Going back to the Orient then, I mean, that wasn't getting that fished then. I mean, it's a lot more popular nowadays than it was back then.
It was hardly fished.
You said Joe Taylor introduced you to the Orient.
Yeah, well, I was lucky because Joe and I, we were mutual friends of Dave Plummer when Dave was running Norwich Angling Centre. I got to know Dave through going pike fishing. I love pike fishing. I got to know Dave through going pike fishing up in Norfolk. And then we all wanted to go mahseer fishing, and so we planned a trip, the four of us. Dave knew, I didn't know Steve Harper, famous Norfolk publisher of books now, and Steve was up in Norfolk, Joe Taylor was in Oxford, in Bicester, and Dave brought the four of us together. We had a meet and all decided we'd go off mahseer fishing. And the first time we met, it was quite funny. We met, I can't remember which station it was, but we met somewhere that was sort of equidistant for the four of us to travel from. And it might have been Cambridge, but we met at a railway station. It was quite funny because as we arrived at the station, there's all these people running around with cameras. Now, I've been a journalist all my life, and I could see they weren't press photographers. They certainly weren't paparazzi. They certainly weren't there for Joe Taylor, even though they thought he was famous. And then we realised, suddenly heard the puff puff, and the Flying Scotsman came through, and they were all there to take pictures of it, which was ironic because Joe Taylor and Dave Plummer both used to be train drivers. But that meeting, although we were there to plan mahseer, Joe was like a little kid because he had these photos that he'd just picked up from being developed, and they were prints. And they were all of one of his first trips. He wouldn't tell us where it was, but he'd just been to Der-Chantecoq because he was the first English angler to fish that. And he'd had like mega hits, but he wouldn't tell us where it was. Joe loves a secret. He's so mischievous. But then he told me, and I went. And I mean, it was just, in those days, early 90s, fishing there, it was just like...
So what would they do? Is it just looking on an ordnance survey map and just finding lakes and randomly fishing?
The Michelin book of map of France, which every angler in those days, I bet Damo and that here, you had one of those in your car and you poured over it, and a bit of blue, you'd go and investigate it. But it was great fun because you weren't allowed to night fish. We'd be hiding from the gendarmes at night. You'd be ploughing through mud.
Did you ever get caught out there?
The closest I ever got to being caught, well, Joe was a nightmare because once I went with Dave Plummer and Richard Furlong, and funny enough, I'm not sure if on that trip, Dean Fletcher came with us once, the British Carp record holder. And Joe Taylor was in a different swim to us, but he pretended he was a nightmare. He'd move road signs, he'd do everything. He's the biggest stroke puller out. And Joe came running round in the middle of the night with a great big mag light, pretending he was the gendarmes, and everyone was panicking, reeling in, cutting lines. So that was quite hairy. I was going to kill him for that. But I was...
It was a good rehearsal though, wasn't it, just in case?
I was there on another trip. I was with Kevin Nash, this again, mid-90s. And we were having a real hit, and we were in a lovely swim. It was mint on the ground. It smelt beautiful. There was rushes and like woods behind us, unlike some of the other swims where you're on an island, up to your knees in mud, just horrendous conditions. And Kevin and I, we've been really catching, and I think we had about 2 in the landing net. And just at that moment, we were so lucky. We heard the engine of a boat, and this is like 1, 2 in the morning, and we're like 2 little schoolboys. We were just laying down, and they cut the engine and they rowed along the bank in front of us, and they were almost touching our rod tips.
Wow.
And perhaps someone had tipped them off we were there, perhaps they'd heard a buzzer in the night, but they were looking for us, and it was terrible.
What was the punishment if they caught you?
They'd confiscate all your gear, take your gear away, take your passport away. You'd have to go to court, pay the fine, etc., to get your gear back. And, of course, a red card for the lake. That was almost the biggest punishment. But, you just felt like two schoolboys. On one hand, it was really exciting, the naughtiness, but you felt that they were going to hear your heart. It was beating because we were lying under these, behind these rushes, and they were paddling along, they were talking, and they were digging down with the oar, seeing if they'd touch a line to make the buzzer go. But the worst thing was you've got two carp in landing nets, you're frightened they're going to splash, and of course even bigger giveaway was any minute now you're going to get another take, and you could just imagine the buzzer going. But luckily it didn't go. They went past and we got away with it, but it was funny.
That's part of the fun of it.
Oh, exactly. I mean, because I know you shouldn't break laws in foreign countries, but it's hardly crime of the century, and obviously they're worried about forest fires, and we were responsible, but you're not spoiling anyone's fishing or anything, and they were great days. And then of course everything went commercial, and I stopped going to France, and also I was going all over the world. What was it like fishing shanty in those? Because you had no information from anyone else whatsoever then regarding the lake, so it was pretty much try and pioneer it all for yourself. I mean, that must have been difficult, prepping swims and finding, especially on a lake that size. It's quite funny. I was thinking of it. I mean, the first thing you do is you just be looking for showing fish, and looking for a swim where you weren't going to get caught. Were you spending more time actually looking rather than actually fishing? To start with, and that what you spend more time doing than fishing was hiding, because you'd hide, and it reminded me when you used to read sort of Enid Blyton famous 5 books as a kid. Everyone wanted to sort of spend a summer holiday on an island, and I remember I've got an Orkney spinner that I use for pike fishing, and I used to tow that, and you'd row out to an island and spend all day hiding and just swimming, pretending to be a holiday maker because there's lots on the lake, and then all night fishing. It was just a dream. But you'd look for showing fish, obviously, and you'd have an echo sound and you look for depths. But it's funny because I was watching Dan on a thinking tackle the other day, and he had 2 plumbing rods, and he was being so precise. Whereas what we used to do was, if we rowed out and we'd find a spot that looked good, but in those days it was probably out of casting range. I suspect then we were probably on like a Shimano, the old Triton C-Spin 4.5s, which no braid in those days. You'd have sort of 15-pound sill cast, and so you'd find a spot which is out of casting distance, so you'd put your markers there and you'd bait up an area probably about the size of a tennis court, and you drop your baits, but then during the day you'd cast and you'd see how far you could cast, and you wouldn't put a marker there, but you'd bait up there as well, so that in the night you'd get a take off the rod that you'd boated out, and then you'd cast just a pub cast as far as you could, and you'd landed it on the second baited spot, and you'd catch off that as well. Would you? Yeah. Would you? Yeah. Well, you're keeping that spot maybe a little bit more quieter as well, aren't you? And being able to bait a spot without actually being able to fish on it. Exactly. It worked well, but I mean, it wasn't particularly scientific. Those fish were naive. It was just as fishing you couldn't believe it. What do you think was in there then? Because that lake's always had a little bit of mystery. Was that around sort of 90s time? Yeah. There were a lot of 30s, real sort of those horse heads. You were lucky to get a 40, but I mean, it's incredible. I'd love to go back there now, because there's some real big ones in there now, aren't there? It's just one of those lakes, so there could be anything in there. I mean, it's just so big, isn't it? I've still got on my shed at home, I've still got a lucky horseshoe that I found on the bed of that. Really? Yeah, which was a bit nicer than things you used to find in Raduta. You'd find human bones on the lake bed there. What happened to Raduta? Because that was again probably late 90s, wasn't it, when the World Championships were being held there? Yeah, I think we went there about 96, something like that, maybe 97, I can't remember. And I think other people, Crowe or Hughesy, would correct me, but I think what happened was Robert Raduta wanted to hold the World Champs there, and I think he made the mistake of stocking it. And I think I'm right in saying that a lot of the originals perished. I don't know if it's KHV or what, but it didn't work. I believe that's what happened, but I went once, really, really enjoyed the challenge of it. Very, very special place, but didn't like the setup. Sorry, in what way? I have to be careful for legal implications. Okay, but we can edit if we need to. Just when we arrived, it was something like out of a mafia film, because Robert Raduta, who owned the lake, he'd been Eli Nastasi's tennis coach, and he had all the photos from Wimbledon and around the world and the plaques and what have you. But his house on the lake was like this. When we got there, he also did hunting, and they hunted bears, which I didn't like. And when we got there were a German hunting party there, and they had, let's say, they brought in rentals on the female side, and they had these sort of, hookers on their arm while they were clay pigeon shooting and what have you. And then they went into lunch, and it just reminded me of the scene. It was a beautiful sort of hacienda type house he'd built. And you've got to remember, in those days, Jeff Pink was with us and Gary Bays. And you've got to remember, in those days, well, Romania's probably not a lot better now, but it was poverty everywhere. It really was poverty stricken. And you had these rich Germans with these hookers shooting shotguns. And when they sat down to lunch, it just reminded me, it made me spooky. I wanted to get out of the room. Just like the scene in the Mafia film where they're all having lunch and they're all slapping each other on the back. But you know, in a minute, someone's going to come in and spray the room with a machine gun. And it felt a bit like that. And I remember I wrote a feature on it for the Sunday Times, because it was when the Austrian guy, I've forgotten his name now, just broken the world record from there. He'd broken it between us hearing about it and going. And I think Joey Kavanagh might have been the only English person to go before us. Well, I say before us, he was there while we were there. He'd been there like a week before. But just the place, the vibe wasn't good. And when I told Robert Raduta that I wanted to do a feature for the Sunday Times, he never came to see me again.
Right.
Because he used to come round in the boat once a day and bring, drop you at your swim, and he'd come round in the boat once a day and bring you food. And we used to write little messages and give them to him, and he'd send them to people, because obviously no mobile phones or anything.
I wonder what he thought you might write about the lake.
Yeah,
then.
Exactly.
Yeah. But that lake had some big commons in as well, didn't?
Yeah.
Tim Paisley, didn't he? Didn't he have his?
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
Was that the world record common for a while?
I think it was.
Yeah,
and he told us there was one bank you were not to fish on because there were gypsies and they'd cut your throat in the night and what have you. And we could see fish jumping over there. So me and Steve, we got in the little boat we had. We went over and we fished that bank. And the gypsies were the loveliest. Well, they weren't they were just peasants. They were the loveliest people. There was this old farmer used to come down, and he'd bring us a bucket of milk, and we'd swap it for a couple of beers. And just when it was sort of getting bedtime, you'd hear his wife. We never met his wife. You'd hear her shouting, obviously, "What time do you call this? Come back in!" He'd go wobbling up the hill drunk, and all the little kids were so sweet. And on our last day, they all came down in their best clothes, and they'd brushed their hair and what have you. They were, they'd spend all day with Steve and I, and we'd draw a circle in the sand around our bivvy, and we'd made one of them a policeman. No one was to go in our bivvy, and it was quite funny because they used to, pretend to step in and then don't. Well, one kid did step in, and the one we'd made the policeman, he was only about 12, but he absolutely lamped this poor kid. When you hear a real smack in the mouth and it sounds like wet. Oh dear, we felt really bad, but no, we had a lovely time there. It was
because you associate the Romanians. I mean, they would take fish from the lake anyway. I mean, was that a problem on Raduta?
Well, I actually felt bad because I remember catching a carp, wasn't that big, and they all came running down. I'm exaggerating, but they virtually came down with a cooking pot and knives and forks. Yeah, and I put it back. And afterwards, I thought, I should have given that to them, because they had no money. That would have fed the whole family for a week. And I know it sounds, a lot of people disagree. I mean, I didn't do it, but I felt I should have given it to them.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because most carp anglers will probably have a different take on that. It's just like, we're quite sacred towards our fish, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. I'm a vegetarian. I don't like, I don't kill anything.
Yeah.
I wouldn't tread on an ant if I could help it, but. No, I just felt for them, they'd have benefited from that.
Yeah.
I mean, most people are hypocrites because, they say that, they go down the chip shop on a Friday night and, I think... I mean, you wouldn't dream of it in a million years here, but
no, I think
those situations, it was a small common, it wouldn't have done any harm.
It's just, I mean, obviously when they're over here, we got our own laws. It's just respecting each other's laws, isn't it? But when you go to a country like that, it's so extreme, isn't it? And that lake looked quite westernised for a while as well, didn't it? Because there were a lot of Western anglers fishing there.
Yeah.
So there must have been a kind of a bit of a conflict between, culture and stuff on that sort, fishing on that sort of a lake.
Yeah, I just didn't like the setup. It was my type of water, lovely big wild lake. I loved it, but I didn't like the disparity of the wealth, and it was like, I'll tell you this, it sounds funny, but it was horrible. When we left to go back to the airport, that was a funny story. When we arrived, we were all drinking on the plane, got off the plane, we were all happy. And the transport to the lake was a minibus, but we didn't realise we were just given the keys to it. And I can't remember his name. If he's listening, he'll have to forgive me. But one of Pinky's mates came. He'd been in the army, and he'd been in Romania during the army or something. I don't know why. So we decided he was going to drive. But he was half pissed, and he drove the 2 or 3 hours, whatever it was, to the lake. And all was in this minibus. And I mean, the roads were terrible. But on the way back, they drove us, and it had like a little pickup on the back with all our kit in. Now you can imagine. I can't remember how many of us there were, but let's say there was 8 of us. Now, 8 of you have been 2 weeks, whatever, on the bank. You know, you're minging, and you've got sacks, landing nets, etc. And so all our stuff is in this pickup on the back. And just before we got to the airport, they stopped. We thought, what they stopped for? They went round the airport. We all jumped up because we don't want anyone nicking our gear, and they opened it. And these German hunters, like a couple of the hookers, they'd been giving them a lift back to town, and these poor girls got out the back of where all our, no seats or anything. It was a bit like a horse box, and these 2 poor girls in their little short skirts and the high heels, and you felt so sorry for them. They've been abused by these German hunters all night, and then got a lift back to town in the back of a pickup trailer with all that. It was horrible.
Different world, isn't it? Different world. And
I did a good feature on it because the lake was created by Ceausescu before he met his untimely end, and he had this vision of like building a canal to link to the sea, which was never going to happen. He was completely bonkers. But when he flooded the valley to created
villages,
the lake, he gave the people like 24-hour notice. You could see a church spire. And that was why there were human bones there, because one of the places we fished, we were fishing over a graveyard.
Unbelievable. What do you make of that, Tobe? Sounds exciting, doesn't it?
I mean, it's a bit different to...
spices the old fishing up a little bit,
I'm used to layer down in Colchester. That's about as far as my fishing
Find any dead bodies in there?
No, I hope not.
And funny enough, I think the other reason we didn't go back... I'm really enjoying this, because you're sort of like prompting me, and you're thinking of things. We were going to go back the next year, because obviously we'd seen the potential... But there's lots of I didn't like. And then Joe Taylor had just phoned me to say, Kazakhstan, I've just been to Kazakhstan. You're going to love it. You've got to go. So I said, thank God for that. You've done me a favour, because I'll do that instead of going back to Raduta next year.
Really?
And I had some amazing adventures in Kazakhstan.
Yeah, but that could be equally as
more
dangerous. Out there. Yeah.
Much more dangerous there.
Is that the country where you hooked where did you hook a catfish in one country and land it in another country?
No, that was Suriname and Guyana. Yeah, that was a Lau catfish. Yeah.
How did that happen? How does that work?
You don't hear that too often, do you?
The river borders the 2 countries, Suriname and Guyana.
Yeah.
And we were on one side, tied up to a tree, fishing from the boat in the edge of a weir pool. Or I say a weir pool, it wasn't a weir, but a pool, a waterfall really, a massive fall at I'm trying to remember the name of it, Wanatoba Falls, I think it was called. One of the most beautiful places I've been in the world, and we were tied to a tree and got a take, and at first it just plodded round in front of me, and I thought it was going to be all right, and then it went out into the pool, and we untied and we went out. I'd learnt my lesson the hard way. We'd learnt the cowboy knot there, where you just when the cowboys come running out the saloon being chased by the baddies, they always just give one tug on the horse's reins when it's tied to the rail and they're off. Well, when I was in Kazakhstan, I hooked what was probably a world record catfish. We nicknamed it Nessie. We'd seen it roll a couple of times, and I hooked it, and it spoiled me because we couldn't get the boat untied in time. And normally I'd jump in after it, but this particular place, I had swum across the river in the Ely Delta, but not in this place. It was like a washing machine cauldron where this catfish went. And even before I'd thought of jumping it happened so quickly I was spoiled. But I think it was in Argentina they taught us the cowboy knot. But anyway, we pulled the knot, off we went and chased this catfish. And it was so exciting because first it went round the whirlpool a few times, then it went down a set of rapids. And the rapids, you just kept expecting it to go round a rock and we the other side. But Winnell, the guy driving the boat, who I think Ali, I'm not sure if when Ali went out on a big fish off, I'm not sure if they met Winnell, but great boatman, because you're in like a sort of dugout canoe but with an engine on the back. And we're bombing. It was so exciting because you hadn't seen it. You knew it was seriously big. And it was still daylight. And then we came out into the main river and it was like tugging round and you just couldn't do anything with it. And then we went over to the far bank and landed it. So yes.
Sorry, how far was it? How far exactly was it?
Hard to say, because by the time I landed it, it was dark. But
pretty far then.
It probably wasn't a massive distance. It could have been a mile. It could have been a mile. I mean, which if you think in this country, imagine going down the Thames a mile. It's not going to happen. You might run 20 yards down the bank.
Yeah, you're going to hit something on the way. How big do you think the fish was? Did you weigh?
Yeah, I weighed it. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Luckily, I was with Joe Taylor's son Mark, who's seriously strong. He's done a few weights in his time and he's a fit, and I wouldn't have been able to. And Nick Berridge was there as well, and we hoisted it up. It was 198 pounds. What made it amazing as well is we'd really struggled on that trip. We'd gone to the jungle to try and catch them, and no one had caught one. We were really struggling, and the doubts creeping in, so it made it more special to then. And it's funny because I'm not a big drinker. I used to like a drink when I played rugby, but drink doesn't really bother me. And there was like 4 of us, and I think we had about 6 bottles of beer, and we were all drunk, just on the emotion of it all. I think I was so drained from the fight, and I'll never forget, because we hadn't done it before. But obviously a fish like that, you're not going to put in a landing net. Now, like Massir, you use a stringer, you drop it into the mouth, out the side of the gills, and tie it off in a big loop. And as long as you've got a nice soft rope, then none the worse for wear, and you just let them recover and then let them go again. Whereas we've been told, if you get a lau, they've got big old sort of sharks type tail, and we've been told you lasso them round the tail. So we spent 2 weeks. It was right at the end of the trip. So Mark and I spent 2 weeks in the boat with this lasso, worrying whether we're going to, be Roy Rogers and be able to lasso one if we hook one. And I'll never forget it, because Mark's trying to sort of get the tail, and I've eventually got the head up at my end of the boat, and I saw the head. And I said to Mark, I've got the head. And Mark said, I can see the tail. And I looked, and I'll never forget it. You sort of looked right and just couldn't believe, hang on, here's the head. You couldn't believe how far away the tail was. It just seemed such a long way. And Mark lassoed it. We got it back to shore. We took one of those, if you get sand delivered to a building site, those massive, great bags are in. That's what we'd taken as a waist sling, and we weighed it in that. Yeah,
that's not very often you need a waist sling that big.
No, that's right.
Did you have any trouble? I mean, where you were, with like rebels and stuff like that out in those countries as well? Because
we had troubles in Kazakhstan. The worst thing was corrupt officials. The whole country was in sort of breakdown. You can't believe that, they have rockets that go to the moon and what have you, take off from, there's a big space station, because everywhere we went was so primitive. Like when you landed at the airport, the first thing you get is you show your passport, and he'd say, you've got big problem. And you'd say, yeah, what's the problem? And again, I'd come back to my school days, but I'm anti-establishment. I hate people abusing their authority. I respect authority, but not when people abuse. You got big, what's the problem? You can't come in. Why not? Because I need $100. And I'd say, FRO, you're not getting it. Try it on some other mug. And Joe's a panicker, and Joe would say, Nigel, just give him the money, he'll arrest us, he'll put us back. And I'd say, no, F off, you're not getting the money. Try it on someone else. You're a disgrace to your country. And that wasn't too bad at the airport.
So they would let you in still?
But then, I think they'd get a bit embarrassed and think, I'll try it on the next mug, But then that wasn't so scary. But then you'd be driving along, and we had it was quite complicated, Kazakhstan. You had to get a visa. And you like your mountaineering, and there's a mountain in Kazakhstan, you probably know it, just outside Almaty, called the Chantecoq Mountain, which is their equivalent of Everest. Yeah. And there was this guy, his name might come to, but I can't think it now. But basically, he was a Kazakh hero because he had climbed Chantecoq, and as a bit of propaganda, they'd allowed him to go, because you weren't in those days, the old Iron Curtain, part of Russia, you weren't allowed out of Kazakhstan. They allowed him to go to Everest, and he became the first Kazakh to climb Everest.
Did he?
And so he was allowed to set up a company where obviously you get your mountaineers from around the world want to come and climb Chantecoq. So you did it through him. So he'd get you your visa, your Sherpas, your cook, etc. So I don't know how Joe found him through a German guy. And basically, we booked with him to climb Chantecoq. So we've got our guides.
Wow.
We were never intended to, but the authorities thought we were. So we've got an interpreter, we've got guides, we've got a cook. And instead of going up Chantecoq, we clear off and go down the Ili Delta fishing, which was a hell of a journey to get there. But you'd get roadblocks, and it was quite scary. Middle of the night, roadblock, and soldiers with guns want to look at all your all your papers and your passports and your visas, and some of them were legit, some looked more like just desperado bandits. No, it was quite
That's
scary
interesting.
times.
So he was a great decoy then, wasn't he, with his being a known mountaineer. And
yeah, but he wasn't with us. If he'd have been with us, you'd have felt a bit safer. He wasn't.
Right.
And you used to see all these dodgy characters. It was funny because when we were flying home in those early days, I went a few times, you'd fly home via Vienna. And on the flight from Almaty to Vienna, there'd be all these real gangster-looking men in their 20s and 30s with sort of, looked like nightclub bouncers, but in Armani suits and, dark glasses. But they were never on the flight back. And when we asked Kazbek, his name might have been, but when he asked him, he said, basically, they used to fly to Vienna, steal BMWs and Mercedes, and then drive them back to Kazakhstan. It was like real mafia. And, in the hotel, you'd see the mafia around. But the scariest thing we ever had was one day we were fishing. And I mean, when I say you're in the middle of nowhere in the Ely Delta, you really are. I mean, we nearly got lost once. Chris Tarrant wanted to come, and he came with us. And I didn't think we were going to see him again because Joe and I went off on an adventure. And we said, we might not be home tonight, Chris. And we took a tent and we took a big drum of petrol and we went off. And we were gone 5 days and we were lost. And we had like just a little treasure map. And you got no idea of what these... You'd be on a main river, then you'd go through a little side stream where you couldn't see where you were because the reeds were so high, and you'd come out into a lagoon like a lake, and then you'd go through. And we had like this little treasure. We've been 5 days. We've got no food left. We've got no petrol left to cook with. We've got a tiny little bit left for the motor on the boat, and we're really getting worried. And
I bet.
Anyway, we eventually got back. But during that trip, when we're in the middle of nowhere, we heard a boat coming, and we didn't know if that was going to be good news or bad news. And this boat pulled out, and it was the two biggest desperados you've ever seen. And they've got a rifle, and on the seat in the boat, you could see they had a little cardboard ammunition box. And our guide was a guy called Yuri. Now, we'd been there a few times now, and we're good friends with Yuri. He had a tank. He was commander of a Russian tank regiment in the army for something like 12 years, and he had his tank regiment tattooed on his chest. Hardest man you'll meet. And he wasn't really our fishing guide, he was our minder, and he was really worried. These guys pulled up their boat, we're tied to the shore and we're fishing, and you could see them looking in. There's there's a Nikon, there's multiplier, there's more money in that boat than they've seen in their lives, and you could see the way their minds were going. And I'm a real anti-smoker, but when I go on trips like that, I always buy 200 Marlboro at the airport. And first thing you do is give them a packet of fags each, and that's great. But then you're thinking they're looking at the other packets, and I'm getting really worried. And they're talking to Yuri. You could tell Yuri was anxious. And we had a couple of cans of beer in the boat, so I gave them a can of beer each. And then I walked up onto the bank, and there was a tree with a bit of a V, and I wedged a beer can in there. And I said to him, can I have a go with his rifle to try and shoot the beer can? And I said, tell him I'll pay for the ammunition. And he liked the idea of that. And I said, I pointed at the box, I said, how many bullets has he got? And he opened it, and there was something like 11 bullets in there. Wow. So I gave him $11 and said like $1 a bullet, and he was happy with that. Yeah. So I'm lying there and I'm firing at this can. And when we were kids, we used to go on outward bound courses and go, rifle ranges, and it's not that hard. The can wasn't that far away, but I kept missing. And Joe whispered in my ear, he said, I didn't think you liked guns. I said, I don't, I'm just trying to use up all his ammunition, because I was frightened. As we went off, he was going to shoot us in the back and have all our money and everything. I said, at least it's going to be a fair fight now. There's 3 of us and 2 of them.
It's good thinking, Nigel. Yeah. You got back then, obviously.
We got back. But I mean, seriously, when you're there, I've never been anywhere really as remote as that. I mean, like Suriname and India
you could
remote,
disappear out in those places.
But if they'd have killed us, sunk our boat, no one would know even where to start looking. And
no, that's a good. What about other European fishing? Have you done any other Eastern European carp fishing?
Eastern European carp fishing.
You've been out to Hungary or anywhere like that?
No, I haven't been to Hungary. It's funny, as I said, I didn't go for a long time because all the commercials I didn't really like.
What do you think of Aqua Euro and Euro Aqua? Those
doesn't
sort of places.
Do it. I mean, we'd all like to catch a £100 carp, but it doesn't do it for me.
Sounds
I know
crazy, and then the amount of the amount of big fish in a lake like that nowadays is just off the scale, isn't it? Yeah. It's just.
I'm happy. And I think everything's relative. It's like, it's like if you're fishing for, say, something in the sea and you use £10 line to catch a 20-pounder, you get just as good a fight as if you're using £50 line and catching a 100-pounder. You know, I like carp that look really nice. I mean, I remember a few years ago I went to France and had quite a big hit, and then we were talking about going the next year, and it never really occurred to me before, but I thought, I don't want to go there to catch a PB, but I thought it'd be nice to go somewhere where you know there's fish in there bigger than your PB, and I did that and had a 60, you know, and that was quite nice, but that was a common and it looked nice, so that was fine. But I don't want to catch ugly pig fish. It's like, you know, it's, I think, I'm sure you're the same. Yeah, I'd rather catch a nice looking 20 or 30 pounder than a big ugly 70 pounder.
Yeah, every time I've been to France, I mean, I enjoy fishing Gigantica, those sort of places for what they are. But I'm pretty appreciative of actually fishing in the UK and being able to catch something that for me means a little bit more. Yeah. You know what I mean? I have to admit, I like the excitement of being on a lake and hearing really, really big fish rolling at night, and the sound of like,
sounds like a cow's falling in. Yeah,
it's a whole different thing.
I went to a nice lake last summer. Actually, I went through a mutual friend. I took the grandsons, blue dark carp fishery down near Limoges, and I think the biggest fish in there might nudge 50, but it's run by an English couple, Darren and Mandy, and the lovely thing is you've got it yourself. And I was catching the fish like 2 foot from the bank. And again, although I say I like big wild waters, I do like intimate little pools. I love fishing right in the edge, and I mean right in the edge. You can't beat that when the rod goes, because again the fight's better, isn't it? I went to a lake in France a few years ago, and I was having to row the baits about 250 yards across, and like again hooking them 2 foot from the bank, but the far bank. And the middle of the night you'd get a drop back. You'd slowly pump it back. By the time it got you just slip the net under it. And if I'm honest, although I enjoyed it, it was a novelty, it was quite boring. Whereas if I'd have been that side, when you hooked it, it'd have been zzz, and it'd have been off, and it'd be so much more exciting.
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to go to Cassine. I have to admit,
Cassine, when the boys were there, a monster carp.
You watched that? Yeah.
I've never fished Cassine because when I was working full time, I didn't have the time, to take for that sort, to do that sort of trip justice. But when you saw the boys there, and
that was a hell of a trip, wasn't it?
I mean, I love monster carp, and I mean Dovey and Spoons. I know they're brilliant anglers, but what are the odds? That place, was it in Spain where Dovey caught the biggest one in the lake?
I know.
And then Spoons does it at Cassine.
It's amazing, isn't it? And I mean, nothing was getting caught out of Cassine over that period anyway. So the odds of them actually catching some, they all caught a fish as well, to catch maybe the biggest one in that lake was amazing.
Incredible. And what made it such great television is that they'd grown up loving Cassine, and there they were living the dream, and you were living it with them. And you could see it wasn't like we've rocked up at Gigantica, which is our lake. It's like that was really special for them, and it came across. And again, it made you think, cool, if I had a bucket list, I don't like bucket list because it sounds like you're dying. I call it a wish list. But it made me think, there's so many places, so little time, aren't there?
That was a really good call to do a monster carp on that lake, because
brilliant.
I mean, as far as adventure carp fishing goes, and this is the real deal. This is that we're not on a lake where we're going to get loads of bites.
Yeah,
this is hardcore carp fishing. I would love to come over that bridge for the first time and just see that lake in front of you. It'd be like seeing Mount Everest. Or
we used to love it again when I first went to Canada carp fishing, because I used to go to Canada skiing and playing rugby, and you'd always ask people about fishing, and you hear all the stories. And the first time I went, that was exciting, because you'd fish the far bank's 30 miles away. And again,
miles.
Toby,
swimming your baits over there, Nigel.
You'd be in Canada, and the far bank would be New York, and it was just. And when we went salmon fishing to Niagara Falls, we had a great thing, because we'd been there a few times, and you only used to fish it at night, because at night when the hydro demand goes up, the water level drops, and all the salmon come into the whirlpool. Bit of trivia: it's where Captain Webb used to be on the matchboxes in the old-fashioned Victorian swimming club. He was the first man to swim the channel. Well, in those Victorian days, you made money by being a professional swimmer, and he did some degrading things, because hardly anybody could swim, and he swam in a sort of indoor pool type thing at Regent's Park Zoo for a week or something without getting out, and people would pay to go and see him because of the novelty. But he got offered a huge amount of money to swim across the whirlpool at the foot of Niagara Falls.
Right.
And when he got there, he realised this is impossible. But he had a young wife and a baby, and they took him out in a boat, and as he got out the boat, it's quite sad, he said to the boatman, he said, you will make sure that, I think it's about £10,000, he said, you will make sure they give the money to my wife, won't you? Because he knew he wasn't going to make it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and he didn't. And it's a scary place there. I mean, you would not want to get, fall in. But we used to fish it all night. And it used to be so exciting because you were spinning at night for salmon, and when you hooked one, they just went like a train. You get spooled if they got out in the main current. But one night, normally we'd pack up before it was fully light, and it was a major climb to get back up the top. But I remember going there once. We used to do it in the winter. Once I played rugby on the Saturday, about 2 pints of Guinness in the clubhouse, cab to Heathrow, flown to Toronto. My mate Martin picked me up, straight to the whirlpool, fished all night, and halfway through the night I was so cold I thought I've got to have a sleep, and I had a little cheap travel sleeping bag with me, and I got in the sleeping bag, and you're only lying on rocks, and you have those terrible anxiety dreams because the level comes up, and you dream that the levels come up and you're going to get washed away down the river. And I remember this particular night, I woke up and I was so stiff. I thought I was stiff because of lying on the rocks, and I played a game of rugby the day before. And then I realised I was so stiff because the sleeping bag was frozen solid, and I had to virtually break my way out of it. But anyway, it had got light by then. And as I was packing up, I looked and I saw these fish right in the edge, and I thought, they're not salmon. And I looked again and they were carp. And so I went back there the next summer with my mate, and we caught over 100 carp between us. Wow. It was just incredible. Wow. And I'll tell you a funny story. I thought when Carl and Alex, they were talking about meeting that girl on the bank.
Yeah.
I always seem to somehow or other manage to get naked on the bank. And this particular time, we were wading in the summer, the level in the daytime, although you wouldn't want to fall in the edge, you're all right, and you were just sort of standing in the river up to about your thighs, and it was a lovely summer's day, so I had no shirt and I just had a pair of boxers on, and they're an old pair of boxers that I'd sort of taken on the trip, and at the end of the day they were going to get launched, and we were catching loads, and you wouldn't normally do it, it's a bit obscene, but my mate Martin, he couldn't believe it, so he said we've got to catch 100, so we were keeping count, which 50 each wasn't a lot there that day. They were you'd have loved it, sweet corn. They were going mad for it, and it was great fun. And the other reason that we wanted to keep going, because they were all commons, and you wanted to catch a mirror, and we'd seen a mirror, and I did eventually catch a 20-pound mirror, which sort of eclipsed all the commons.
How many commons would you have to catch for one mirror?
Well, I think that day was 49.
Oh my God.
But anyway, we'd got to the 49 or 50 mark, so we're going to pack up. In all the times I'd fished the whirlpool, I'd never seen another human being. It's a major trek to get down to the bottom there. Obviously, all the tourists go up to the top of the falls and take the cable car across. Anyway, down the bottom, in these boxes, and by now, I'm pretty grimy, so I decide I'm going to launch take my pants off, put my tracksuit bottoms on, and walk up the top like that. So just as I take my boxers off, I get another take. So I grab the rod, and I'm playing this fish. And my mate Martin, and some Canadians are quite prudish, he said, Nigel, there's 2 women coming. And I'm thinking he's winding me up. He said, there's 2 women coming. And I said, shut up. And I stand there naked. There's no one. You could be, in the middle of the desert. You're so isolated down the foot of the ball. No one can see you from the top. And I'm playing this fish. And then I hear this American female voice say, hi, isn't it? Oh. And I turned round. Of course, that was the worst thing I could have done. Turned round. It was these 2 hikers. And it's funny because I often think of that, and they probably still tell the story about the fisherman who, she wouldn't have realised I was just getting changed. She probably thought I was a naturist fisherman who liked to fish in the altogether.
Naturist. Yeah, brilliant.
We're seeing a running trend in our guests now, aren't we?
Yeah. I could give another one. I could give an explanation to anyone on Linear about 2 summers ago. I was fishing there, and it was really, really raining, and I was under my brolly, and it was a real storm, and the rain was hammering down, and there was a big raft of weed that had got broken up by the wind and was drifting across, and it wiped out my 3 rods, and my 3 rods went over, and I'm thinking, I'm going to have to go out and deal with that, and I didn't have any spare clothes, and it was in the summer. I don't think I even had a Mac with me, and I'm going to get soaked. I did the logical thing. I just stripped off naked, went out there, dealt with it all, because you can dry yourself, you can't dry your clothes. So if anyone was in the bivvy the other side of the lake looking at this loony trying to get weed off his lines and get his rods recast, if he wondered why that person was naked, it was me, and it was because I could just towel myself down and then put my dry clothes back on. So to me it was perfect logic. And
I've had to go in there, well, not completely naked. In Manor once I hooked a fish in there, and Manor Farm on the Linear Complex, and I stripped down. Someone had to see my skinny little white body swim into the lake. Not sure if we were allowed to actually swim in there at the time, actually. Well, I don't think we are now, but that was a bit of a horrible sight, I think. Yeah, I'll tell you what, actually swimming in lakes though just feels, to me, that feels so scary anyway. There's something about being in a lake, and I'm not very comfortable with that.
I was fishing a lake, I can't remember where once, might have been in Essex, a long time ago, and there was somebody, it was in the old days where rigs weren't as safe, casting wasn't as good, and somebody had cast to an island, cracked off, and there was the lead wrapped round the snag, and there was the boilie, and a swan had eaten the boilie and hooked itself and was tethered.
Right.
I can't just watch that. So I swam out. I know you probably shouldn't. You should have gone and got help or something. But anyway, I swam out, and I can't remember exactly what I did, but I managed to bite the line, but the swan's still got the lead and the hook and the boilie from its mouth. So I wrapped the lead round my hand, and I just swam slowly back, towing it. But two problems. One, it was a very weedy lake. Now, swimming out there, I just did front crawl, so you're just flat, and it was easy. But swimming back, I was sort of doing side strokes, so my legs were lower. My legs, you have got that worry of the weed grabbing you. And then its mate appeared, and it was so brave, its mate. The swan I was towing, and I've helped a few swans over the years, and they seem to have that. They know that you're trying to help them, they go all submissive, no problem with that. But its mate was dive bombing me, smashing into me, and what with that going on and your legs getting deeper, that was a little bit hairy. But I mean, I always call it SAS training. You have to sort of prepare for the worst, and you think, well, if the worst comes to worst, I can let go of it and I can go back to front crawl.
You just want an excuse to dive in the lake and go for a swim, don't you, by the sounds of it?
Possibly.
Here we go. No, we got to get back in again. No, we got to go in.
Possibly.
Actually, a lake that I might be fishing later this year. It wasn't a carp angler, but there's a memorial up now. Last summer, this guy just decided to swim across to the island. It was probably no more than, 100 yards or so, and he got halfway across. He must have been some sort of a swimmer to think that he could swim across. Yeah. Went under. Took him about 12 hours to find him, I think, by the sounds of it.
Isn't it? Yeah.
What's going on there? Are they just is it just the cold?
As a young journalist, I remember the first coroner's inquest I covered when it was a canoeist had died in the Thames, and I remember his friends saying, "Can't believe it. He was such a strong swimmer." But you don't die of drowning; you die of heart failure. Because, like when you get in the cold shower and you go like that, it takes your breath away. Well, the cold gets to, especially like in the summer when someone's been drinking in the pub and then decides to go for a swim, your blood is all warm, and then you get in the cold water, the blood gets cold, and when it hits the heart, it just stops.
Yeah. I know Rob here actually was talking. He was on a first aid course, and he said if anyone ever falls into the water with their clothes on, don't pull them out of the water straight away, because it's just the shock of the difference in temperature, especially in the winter when the water can be warmer than the outside temperature or vice versa.
Yeah, no, I've done that. When I lived on the Thames, we used to have a round the island annual swim. And I remember one year I got out, it was really cold, and when I got out, went in the shower, went in a hot shower, and thought it was all right. It wasn't that cold when I got out the river. It was only about a kilometre swim, only been in, not that long. But when got in the shower, I got the shivers, and when I got out, I couldn't stop shaking. And they said that was the worst thing you can possibly do. And there's a tragic story. I was sea fishing once. It was with Sky tight lines. Caught a 198-pound skate up off the coast of Oban in Scotland. And, when you're sea fishing, you're wreck fishing. And I always like to ask the skipper the story of the wreck. And I wish I hadn't asked. It was tragic because you could see the shore. The shore was only about 400 or 500 yards away. And the boat that had sunk, they'd all managed to swim to shore, got out, and then all drowned. All died of hypothermia. It'd have almost been better if they'd just gone down and drowned. But you imagine that. Your boat sinks on a stormy night off the coast of Scotland. You manage to swim to shore. You get out alive, and then they all died. It makes you want to cry.
Tragic.
Yeah. But I mean, anyone listening, don't get... I'm a strong swimmer. I love swimming. I used to swim every morning a mile before work. You have to respect water. You have to weigh into account of. It's like yesterday, I cycled over the Thames, Hambledon Lock, and it was evil. It wasn't a weir, it was just a torrent. You couldn't see the weir at all. It was just bombing through. And you're thinking, God, I would not want to fall in there. Yeah, if that had been somewhere foreign and it was warm water, you could have dived in and got washed down for 100 yards, and then the current would ease and you could have swum to shore and it would have been good fun. But you have to weigh everything up, you have to take. And the other thing you have to remember, like when I'm pike fishing on my own in a boat, I'll always have a life jacket on. And
do you know what? You see that
if you fall in, it's because of an accident. You haven't dived in, you've hit your head or something,
Yeah, those guys on Raisbury and what's that, like New Year's Eve or something?
I know.
Not wearing life jackets.
Yeah, Jim Shelley's mate, wasn't it? Mark, yeah.
Andy Mundy on Queenford Lagoon. Do you remember that?
Keith Selleck
on Savay and Clive. Yeah, they were about 50 yards from the shore. They were very, very close as well.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is, like, I don't know if you ever did your Duke of Edinburgh award at school or whatever, but swimming in your clothes is such a different kettle of fish to swimming in swimming trunks. It really is. It's I always say, Trevor West told it to me once when I was going barbel fishing in a flood on the Bristol Avon years ago, and I was setting off on my own, and his final words to me, and I've never forgotten them, he said, "No fish is worth risking your life for."
No,
it's
no, that's a good point.
When slightly funny side, when we used to fish in the States and Canada a lot, they used to, the Americans love their beer in the boat and what have you, and they say the most common cause of death, like CSI and that, the police always use abbreviations for everything. The abbreviation there is DFO. Do you know what that is? Drowned flies open. Because the idiots, like most people who fish in a boat regularly, if you want a leak, you go in a bucket or a bait tub, and the good thing is you can kneel down in the bottom of the boat, you're not putting yourself at risk, no one can see you from the bank, and you tip it over the side, whereas people stand up, and the stupid thing is they don't want to splash the side of the boat, so they lean a bit too far and fall out. And
do you know what? I got a funny story, which I was fishing on Chew Valley a couple of years ago with my friend. He's going to love it that I've mentioned this. And he was having a piss off the boat that day, and always made sure the wind was in the right direction. I think the wind must have changed direction when I decided to, and I ended up sort of pissing in the boat. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so
not as bad as John Rule. I don't know if you've heard of John Rule, Essex sea skipper. He used to skipper out in Isle of Marada in Florida and from Bradwell-on-Sea. And I remember I once interviewed him. Can't remember what for, but I interviewed him. One of the questions I had to ask him was, in all your years skippering, charter boats, what's the funniest thing you've ever seen? And he said he had a guy on board in the winter cod fishing who had a balaclava. But the balaclava, usually you've got eyes and mouth, but this one only had eyes. And the guy was boasting how warm he was until he got seasick and couldn't get his balaclava off in time. It didn't bear thinking about. Which that's one of the things, people forget in this modern age. One of the reasons you go fishing when you're a kid, you go fishing to have fun, catch fish, and to have a laugh, don't you? And that's one of the best things about fishing. I mean, when we used to go to India, the pranks we had to call a truce in the end because they got too bad, but the jokes we used to play on each other were
Go on, we used to do all sorts of stuff. I remember being in Lechlade, near Horseshoe Lake.
Yeah.
And we would get to it'd be a Sunday afternoon. One of these days, it was a Sunday afternoon. I was with my friend, and we were fishing next to the bridge, the humpback bridge that goes over there.
I know what you mean, yeah.
We got a little bit bored, so we started casting over the bridge and seeing if we could hook cars coming across the... We got bored with that, so we casted across to the marina on the other side to see if we could hook a boat on the other side. We were young, Nigel.
Yeah.
And I hooked onto this boat, and I was trying to pull, couldn't get the lead out of the boat. And then I leant out to sort of grab the line, and as I leant out to grab the line, I stepped straight into the river. With that, so I'm up to my neck in water, stood in the river, and with that, my dad came round the corner to come and pick us up. And he saw my friend, and he went, "Oh, all right, you ready? Well, where's Simon?" And my friend just went, "He's down there."
I love it.
It's all part of going fishing when you're younger.
You just reminded me of another one there. I mentioned swimming at Hampton Pool. We still argue about it to this day, but my mate Martin Hurst, he's county swimming champion, and he'd just joined the Marines, and he was home on leave, and we're having this argument about whether I could land Martin Hurst. So we went to Hampton Swimming Pool, our local pool, and in those days we often used to go there for a midnight swim anyway, just climb over the wall and have a swim, And so about midnight we go there. He's got a leather belt. I've got in those days I remember buying, you could get a combination rod. It was supposed to be a float rod, a spinning rod and a sea rod all in one. So I've got the sort of the thick tip section, the sea rod, but I had this I think it was an Intrepid Black Prince, this reel, which I'd won the Middlesex Association of Boys Club's annual fishing match or whatever it was, and it had been one of the prizes, this reel. So I went, I don't know where I got it from, but got some 25 or 50 pound line, whatever it was, spooled it up. So there's all my mates there, we're up the deep end. He's got the belt on, the line's tied to the belt, he dives in, he starts swimming off, and the drag's going zzz, and the next thing I know, I thought the line had broken, but of course what I hadn't factored, being so young and naive, was that 50 pound line on that little reel, there's only about 20 yards went on there, and Hampton Pool's 38 metres long, so he spooled me. But we still have if I said, Martin lives in Portugal now, but if I see him now, he still says, he couldn't land me, but he won't have it that it was technical failure, otherwise I think I'd have landed him.
Oh, it's great. I love those stories.
He used to love coming fishing with me, Martin, because he just liked the adventure of fishing. And I remember once we were in Bushy Park tench fishing. He never fished. He just liked coming, probably before he joined the Marines, part of Wade joined the Marines. He was that type of bloke.
Right.
But I remember once we were lying there, and he was asleep, and I'm in those days you had your bite lamp on your swing tip looking for a bite from the tench, and I heard this bloody revving, and there's these motorbikes and these Hell's Angel type, greasers, rockers, whatever they were raced. They'd come into the park on their motorbikes. In those days they didn't lock the gates at night, and they were racing around the lake on the motorbike, and we're sort of down a bit of a slope, and I'm hiding, and I wake him up. He said, "What's going on?" I told him, and he just went, "Oh, okay," and went back to sleep. And I was thinking, if they see us, they're going to beat us up or whatever. I had one a bit like that with Dave Plummer when we were in Canada once, carp fishing. We'd been dropped off by a mate, and it was a remote place. It was all a little bit dicey, and we heard this sort of spinning of wheels, and a car pulled up. And again, we're on a slope, which reminded me, we sort of, a bit like in the army, in the trenches, we sort of crawled up and peeked over the top. And these two guys, they had those aerosol spray cans, and they were painting this car, spraying it. They had newspapers on the windscreen. They'd obviously just nicked it.
Right, yeah.
One of them was spraying the car. The other one was changing the number plates. And we quickly ducked back down because we thought if they think we were witnesses, they might want to dispose of the witnesses. There's a big bit of water here where we can dispose of them. But we couldn't believe it. But that's, they're things you laugh about, but they're also some of the things that make fishing, sort of...
We used to try and hook swimmers as well down the river on a Sunday morning. There used to be swimmers you might have been one of these swimmers, Nigel, and we'd try and hook a swimmer or it was just fun in the day, wasn't it?
You've probably done what
Do
I've
you think
had
we're
done.
promoting fishing well here?
Besides,
I can see this going down well, can't I?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know if I've told you this, but besides rugby, when I was young, I used to row a lot. I rowed very seriously, which helps with, because if I'm on any lake or reservoir where there's hire boats and you've got to row, I know I can get to the spot I want to get to before anybody else, not just on technique, but you can go in a straight line, which most people have a difficulty doing. But anyway, when I rowed, I've had lead weight swim feeders cast at me. I've had all the abuse. I've had balls of ground bait thrown at me. But once we're going under the bridge at Twickenham that leads over to Eel Pie Island, and everybody in life's got a phobia about something, and we didn't know it. But this lad Quinton, who was our bowman, he had a phobia about maggots.
Right.
And apparently earlier that day, this fisherman claimed we'd taken out his line. Now, me being a fisherman, I always used to say, if we were in a coxless boat, I'd be careful. If we had a cox, I'd always say, be careful, the anglers. But anyway, we'd upset this fisherman. I didn't even know we'd upset him. And as we're coming back, we're coming under the bridge, and he was waiting for us, and he was on top of the bridge, and he had like a 2-3 pint tub of maggots, and as we came under the bridge, he just dunked it on us, and it only landed on one person. It was Quintin, and Quintin was ginger, and he had, how ginger people sometimes have that really crinkly afro type hair, and it couldn't have been worse, because if it was in Europe, just hit you on the head and all fall off, whereas they were all in his hair, and Quintin just completely freaked out. And he wasn't an aggressive type of bloke, but He undid his shoes and he just jumped out the boat, swam to the bank, ran up the bridge, kicked 10 tons of the proverbial out of this fisherman, then ran down, and I think he was a matchman, chucked his seat box in the river. He just completely lost it, and we couldn't do it. We were in the middle of the river. And I'll never forget. And then we had a shower, and we're laughing at Quentin, seeing a side of Quentin we'd never seen.
Right.
And we had a shower, and then we went round, and we were in a pub a lot of people would know in Twickenham called the Eel Pie. It was a nice, sunny Sunday lunchtime, having a drink. And next thing, police car pulled up. And it was so lucky because I didn't recognise the policeman, but he said, "Nigel, do you mind coming over here?" And he called me to one side and he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I said, "No." And that school rector I mentioned, he was there a couple of years younger than me.
God, it keeps springing up.
Yeah, he was there a couple of years younger than me.
Right.
And he said, "I've heard from the fisherman what happened." He said, "Just tell me the truth, what happened with you?" And I told him, and he said, "Listen, the only real problem I've got is he lost his glasses." He said, "Do you think you have a word with your crew? Have a whip round, buy him a new pair of glasses and we'll square it off." And so we did. But I thought he'll never tip maggots. He could tip maggots over another 100 oarsmen and they wouldn't have the same effect. Just Quentin just absolutely touched the nerve.
You know that, you know how to get him next time, That's... Well, I was going to talk to you about. Do you still live? So you don't live on the river anymore?
No, I
You used to live on a boat on the river.
It's ironic. Wherever I've lived, I never really realised this, but I've never lived within more than about a mile of the river. And and
you
for
said
8
the River
years,
Thames as well.
Yeah, for 8 years I lived on a houseboat on the river. But wherever I've been, I've lived in Twickenham, Richmond, Hampton Hill. And I grew up fishing Bushy Park. The Thames and Bushy Park, the Diana Pond, where again Mickey Gray cut his teeth.
Terry Hearn,
so did Terry Hearn. Yeah, I can remember Terry turning up there as a little, lad. And then
did you see a bit of sparkle there, Nigel, those days?
Yeah, straight away you could see it. If you caught a fish, he'd tell you which one it was and what the weight was. And the thing I'll never forget is when he first came there, he was only a young teenager. But the bit I'll never forget is when he first got his car, and I think it was a little Fiesta or something like that. And I remember he passed his driving test and I spoke to him in the car park. I'll never forget, it wasn't big-headedness, it was just the confidence and probably the exuberance of youth. He said, "That's it, I'm off to fish Yateley." Yeah, and he went to Yateley and he bloody caught them.
Yeah, he did catch them, didn't he?
And when he went to, in those days at Bushy Park, the Royal 40 was a bit like, it was a bit like, the Loch Ness Monster. No one was, until Richard McDonald caught it, no one was actually sure it existed, and everyone used to talk about these hushed tones. And after Richie caught it, I can remember Terry saying, "That's it, I'm going to get my dad to drop me off there and I'll stay there till I caught it." And you knew he was going to, amazing.
Yeah, those parks were nice. I mean, Diana found him, wasn't it?
That's what I caught. It's always special because I caught my first ever fish from the Diana Pond when I was 5 years old. I was lucky enough, I mentioned his name earlier, Steve Glassett, but I can't explain it. I've always loved fishing. I was born with it in my blood. I just wanted to go fishing, and I really can't put my finger on where it stems from. I've got vague recollection of being a toddler on a pier and someone catching a conger eel, but I think if anything, my cousin Christopher Creswick, who lived down in New Milton, I don't know if it was his shed or his dad's, my Uncle Les's shed, but there was a roach of about £2 caught from the Hampshire Avon. I don't even really remember it. Chris has told me this subsequently, but that might have been a trigger. But all I know is, from when I could walk and talk, I was pestering my mum to take me fishing, and my poor mum used to take me, and I had no idea what I was doing. I never caught anything. I had a tank aerial for a rod. I had my dad's old ammunition case as a tackle, but caught nothing. And in fact, I could say my dad invented barbless hooks because I think he was so worried I'd, get a hook in my eye. I don't think he cut the barb off. I think he just used to cut the whole point off. But no idea. And then when I went to Carlisle Infant School at the age of 5, I'm in the same class as Steve Glassett, and his dad used to take him and his brother Bill every Saturday to the Diana Pond, and they invited me. And Bill got bored and went off to the shops to get a can of Coke or whatever it was in those days, probably Tizer while he was gone, I'm looking after his rod, which I remember it was split cane with a 5-glass tip, which was, probably the equivalent of having the latest, Guru Aventis rod or whatever they are. I caught this little roach, which at the time seemed massive, but looking back, it must have been tiny because Steve's dad had a custard can, which was probably a 1-gallon can, and all the fish we caught, we put in that, took them home and put them in his pond. So they were, they're probably only about 2 ounce, but and that was the beginning of it. And I still go fishing with Steve and Bill now, which is incredible.
Yeah, you managed to keep those friendships for all that time.
Yeah.
It's having that common bond, isn't it? The only friends I've got now from school were old fishing friends. It's, you've still got that connection. Everything was a challenge when you first started as well, wasn't it? Just to catch anything and then to see something a little bit bigger. And, the whole thing was just, it was so new, wasn't it? And, special.
I've got a photo of Steve and I sat in the Calvary River holding a 70-odd pound massier, and I've got it in a frame at home. I haven't got many photos framed, but I've got them, and I'd give anything to have a picture of us with that little 2-ounce roach when we were 5 years old. Because, the way I love some of those pictures Damo's got out in the office there of, not just the picture of him with the big fish, but netting it, playing it, the rig. Can you imagine a frame with like Steve and I as adults with a 70-pound mass here, and picture of us as 2 5-year-olds to think? And that's what's so brilliant about fishing, the journey it can take you on. You can go from there to there. Did
you ever think you'd gone on a worldwide fishing journey?
I think deep down, because you see films, you read books, and you think, I'd like to do that one day. So I think I did. And you always think you like to catch a shark, don't you? When you're a kid, the shark's the big fish. And I think when I played rugby, you'd get invited. You go on a lot of overseas tours. And then, in the sort of mid-30s, when you're starting, the injuries are catching up and you can't always play, and then you're forced into retirement, you sort of start replacing the rugby tours with fishing trips. And the more trips you go on, you meet people who've been somewhere else and have done something else. And, it still happens now. You could be in one country, meet someone from another nationality. It's like I went to... We wanted to catch a tarpon, Joe and I. So we went to Costa Rica because Joe suffers from seasickness, and you can catch him in the river there. So we went there, and we used to catch tarpon in the afternoons, but in the mornings we'd go out trying to catch snook off the beach with lures, which was great fun. And we'd go in the mangroves and fish ultralight tackle, little spinning rods with floating little poppers. And we'd catch fish from like 6 inches to 6 pound, and it was great fun. And then I hooked this thing. I had no idea what it was. Wow, what's that? Get it in the boat. It was about 3 pound, and it was an alligator gar. I'd never heard of an alligator gar. And Joe said to me, they go to over 100 pound. I said, cool, I'd like to catch one of those, because anyone who doesn't know, an alligator gar is like a cross between a pike and a crocodile. Anyway, we did the research, and of course by now the internet was up, and next thing we know, we're in Florida, and I've caught 100, and I think it was 115 pound alligator. Although I caught 115 pounder, but I have to say, I wouldn't say I was gutted, but it looked tiny, because literally about 10 minutes before I hooked it, I'd already had a 90 pounder, and that seemed big when I caught the 90 pounder. But when I caught the 100 pounder, which was the holy grail you were hoping to catch, it didn't seem big, because about 5 minutes earlier, one had rolled right at the back of our boat that absolutely dwarfed it. And of course, when I got the take, I was thinking that might be it. So when this, you shouldn't be ungrateful to, I think it was 119 pounds. You shouldn't be ungrateful to that, but it just looked tiny.
Yeah.
I suppose it's a bit like if you were hoping for a 40 pound carp and you saw a 70 roll and you got the take from the 40. You have to kick yourself occasionally if you're disappointed with what you catch. You have to give yourself a reality slap, don't you? But
you do. But it's interesting though, because you're saying, so it's the fact that you've been doing other things around the world is, and meeting different people that's giving you that sort of connection. If you were just sat in one place and not necessarily straying too far from, certainly out of this country, you probably wouldn't have ever sort of gone down that route in the first place.
And I think they all make you a better angler. You learn knots, you learn techniques. Like uptiding for taupe helps you fish for barbel in a big flood, or if you're fishing for carp in a river, it helps you. It helps you deal with flood conditions or a strong current. I think whatever you fish for makes you think. And it improves you as an angler, doesn't it?
Yeah, certainly. We're talking about work as well, Nigel, because actually I don't really know your work. What do you actually do for a living now? Is it? I know you present Fisherman's Blues on a Sunday morning.
I'm trying to retire. I've been a journalist all my life.
Yeah.
Funny enough, going back to the story about the school and the talk, I used to love reading, and I thought I'd write books, because when you're a young kid, you're not really aware of newspapers and journalism, and I thought I could write books. And then by the time I'd got to college, I realised that you could be a journalist, and I think I met a guy in a pub who was a journalist. Yeah, I first went to college thinking I was going to be the PE and English teacher. Always loved sport. But then I realised there's no money in that, and that, as we discussed earlier, too many teachers were, excuse me any teachers listening, because I know you might be that one good one, but lots aren't, and I thought I'd have to work with them. And I thought the only way you earn any decent money is if you're the headmaster, and I didn't want to be a headmaster. So anyway, I became a journalist. I've been a journalist all my life, and I've had a great career. I've loved it. I've worked for, been reporter, been a sports reporter, been sports editor, been an editor, worked in newspapers, magazines, and my friends hate me because one of the big group of papers I worked for, we sold out to the Daily Mirror, and I decided at the age of 45 I'd go freelance and just do what I wanted to do. And I worked for the Sunday Times as a rugby correspondent, going around reporting on rugby matches. And I'm lucky enough to present Fisherman's Blues on talkSPORT. I don't like to say it sounds conceited, but if you're a kid, you'd have to pinch yourself and think you've got your own radio show, on the world's biggest sports radio station. So that came from your a relationship that you built up earlier with Keith Arthur, wasn't it? Did you know Keith and I have always lived close to each other. We knew each other through when he first worked at Daiwa, and I was doing that catalogue. It's funny, isn't it, how things go? And he got approached when they started the original, the Wire TV, the forerunner to Tight Lines on Sky, and I think he knew about that messier, and I think he recommended I'd be a good guest. And I went in, and in those days, it was a bit like the radio. People phoned into the TV show. It was live, and people phoned in and asked questions. So.
So you went on there as a guest? Yeah,
I went on there as a guest, and then I went on a guest a couple of times. They quite liked me, and then they said, would you like to do an outside shoot? At the time, I was doing a lot of pike fishing at Ardingly Reservoir, and that Orkney spinner boat of mine was there. So I went down there. I'd never done any TV work at all. I'd done a little bit as a journalist. I'd interviewed people, but just like a straight news wham-bam interview somebody. But I went down there in my Orkney spinner with a cameraman, caught a rake of pike. They liked it, and I carried on working for Tight Lines ever since.
So, mate, it's all coming from that cover, though, isn't it?
Yeah, there we go.
It's been so significant, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? It's funny how and how in life just little things can be turning points without you really realising it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because the ironic thing is, although I've been a journalist all my life, I never tried to. I never thought I want to work on TV. Like, if you're listening, Ali, I think you'll forgive me this, but like Ali probably had it all mapped out. He wanted to be a star. He knew how to go about it, and he was good at it, and he's done a great job of it. And, I love you for it, Ali. But, I never wanted to be on telly. I never tried. I never wanted to have my own radio show. I never tried. It's just sort of...
So you were standing in for Keith on Tight Lines, weren't you?
No, Tight Lines, Keith ended up being the host, took over from Bruno Brooks, so he was in the bothy, as they called it, every week, and then each week they'd have somebody out doing a shoot. So it might be Ali Amidi showing you how to catch carp in London Docklands, or it might be Nigel Botherway showing you how to catch tench from a gravel pit, whatever. So I did that, and then when they launched Fisherman's, when talkSPORT launched, they decided they'd have a fishing show, which Keith presented, and he asked me if I'd be his sort of number two. So if he was on holiday or sick, which I think he was only ever sick twice in 15 years, I'd cover for him. But he was on holiday a lot because he loves his annual trip to Florida. And so that would be 3 weekends. In those days, it was 2 shows a weekend, so that'd be 6 shows. So yeah, I did a lot.
Did you find the TV stuff easier or harder than the radio stuff to present on?
Radio's probably stressful in as much as it's live. You can't say cut and retake it like you can with the TV.
Have you ever had any really big mishaps on the radio?
Only one, which I'll tell you about when I just finished the analogy. But the difference with the filming is the pressure is catching a fish, isn't it? Because you've got again, all the boys here know all about it, and you've been out, I think you and Toby have both been out on shoots for Monster Carp, etc. When you've paid for, you suddenly think they have paid for a cameraman, a sound man, a producer, for me to catch a fish. And if I go fishing tomorrow, I love fishing, and we all know as anglers, you don't catch fish every time you go. And if I go on my own tomorrow and I don't get, but I'm not too bothered. I'm having a nice time. You know, it might happen next week. But if you've got that crew with you, you're under real pressure to catch. And the longer you go without a bite, that is pressure. But conversely, when you catch one, it's all the richer, because if you're on your own, you catch it, you put it back, no big deal. Whereas when you catch it for the cameras, it sort of trebles, quadruples the high you get from catching it. And that's why anyone watching now, you can see, Dean Macy and I are great mates. You know, we fish together a lot socially and done a bit of filming together. And you can see how excited Dean gets. Now, one of the reasons is because he's an Olympic athlete, he's the ultimate competitor. But the other, you can see sometimes, I'm sure he'd say this, and Ali and Dan would all say it, it's that sense of relief. Phew, we got one. You know, the pressure's off, we've got one. We used to have a saying at Tight Lines, one fish makes a film. But in answer to your question, the worst thing I ever had in all the years of doing, 20 years now, was, and I've got to put this into context, because there is I think it's about a 7-second dump button. So if you're the tech operator, the producer behind the glass, someone says something they shouldn't, you can press it. But in those early days, talkSPORT Fisherman's Blue starts at 6. You quite often get a producer who started at midnight or maybe even before. So they're on their last legs. They're hanging by the time they do your show. And it's not been unknown for the producer to go to sleep. And you look up and there he is behind the glass sending up Zs. And that had happened
go to sleep
on this occasion. So
it's like you, Chap.
So
I don't fall asleep behind it.
Yeah, apologies if we're sending it to sleep. But anyway, there was no dump button facility, and you just get a screen. And obviously the producer screens the calls, and there's a couple of calls up on the screen. And it said something like, Pete wants to speak about bolognese fishing, the old long trotting rods you use on rivers of 18, 22 foot long rods for controlling a float. And so anyway, I click to the line, and you got your headphones on. You say, "Hi, Pete, I hear you want to talk about bolognese, stick float fishing, whatever." And it was quite a seductive woman's voice. And she said, "No, actually, it's Diane," or whatever she said her name was. She said, "I've got a different question for you." And I didn't see it coming. I really didn't see it coming. I just thought Robin behind the glass is a bit dopey, and he's put up the wrong order. Anyway, she said, "I've got another question for you." And I didn't see it coming. I said, "Far away, how can I help you?" And she said, oh dear. She said, "Is it true?" No, so not is it true. She said, "That's right." She said, "Is it true if you stick a brown trout far enough up your arse, it'll reach your erogenous zones?"
Does it?
And bearing in mind, I'm new. I'm only. If that happened to me now, I could deal with it better. But I'm the new boy. I'm subbing in for Keith. It was probably only about the third time
So
I'd subbed in for him, and I didn't know how to cut the call off even. All I knew was how to fade out the volume. So I faded out the volume, and as my finger got to there, I could see the button for the next caller. So I just pressed on that, and it was like Fred from Essex. And I couldn't have had the better bloke to get me out of it, because I said, "Fred, I don't know what you want to talk about, but I'll talk to you about anything as long as it doesn't involve brown trout or erogenous zones." And he couldn't be the better, but he sounded like your black cab driver. He goes, "Leave it out, Nigel. It's too early in the morning for any of that malarkey. I want to talk to you about what flavour boilers you use." And
it wasn't for her, though.
Phew, thank God for that. And we went on to that. But my heart was racing.
You never. I remember watching. We're not talking about fishing now. I remember watching Going Live in the 80s. And do you remember 5 Star were on there? And they were.
You're losing me here. I'm lost, Simon. Sorry. Who are 5 Star?
5 Star were a band in the 80s.
I thought it was petrol.
It could be 4 Star, 5 Star. And they were on the show, and they were answering all these phone-in questions. Philip Schofield was presenting it, and then someone rang in and said, 5 Star, I think you're.
Oh, right.
It's like on air. Yeah. It's like, it's just.
Yeah. Well, there was the famous Bill Grundy one with the Sex Pistols as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, of course. Right. Yeah.
I used to interview. I interviewed the Sex Pistols before they were famous, before anyone had ever heard of them. I was working for the old Brennard's news agency as a journalist at Heathrow Airport. We used to interview all the celebs going in and out, politicians and what have you. And we got a phone call to say, "We're in your press room, where are you?" It was like a Sunday night, and I think we're in the Vanguard Club playing snooker. There were no flights going in and out, and they were so desperate to be interviewed, they bought a case of beer And me and this photographer went into the press room to see them, and they couldn't have been nicer to us, because they wanted the publicity. They're saying we're going to be famous through a group. We'd never heard of them. And the next time they came through the airport, I'll never forget it, I nearly had a fight with Sid Vicious because he went for one of the photographers. And one of them, I can't remember which one, they don't have them now because of bomb threats. But you know the sort of dustbin size waste bins you used to have in corridors of airports, and you sort of a swing lid, you could put a cigarette in there, people could smoke in airports in those. And I can one of them lifting that swing lid and like chucking up down there, they were so out of it. And also taking pictures, trying to interview Sid Vicious, quite sad looking back on it, when he was flying to New York with Nancy Spungen.
Right, yeah.
Of course he ended up killing her, tragic.
Yeah, they were good, weren't they?
Oh God, they were amazing.
Yeah, but
I wasn't a punk though.
No, but good music though. Yeah, good music. So I mean, anything can go wrong with that, can't it? With live radio.
And that's the thing. That, again, you and I were talking off air earlier about how when you finish this, you can feel drained. I think that's one of the reasons you feel drained when you come off air, because you're only ever one little. Yeah. Like people don't realise. People call in. There's one guy who used to phone in regularly, and I haven't spoken to him for a long time. Yeah, because they can be, they're only one word, one sentence away from losing you your job. And I don't think people realise that. It's yeah,
that's true. Getting back to tight lines, what happened with tight lines? Because 1 minute it was there on a Friday. We used to watch it. What was it, about 6 o'clock every Friday? And then it just. And
the best thing, I'm passionate about getting kids into fishing. There was the Drennan Young Angler.
It's a great show.
This isn't fact. This is my understanding, because I was a freelancer and I went to the wake. We had a wake for the programme, and there was people wanting to get a petition to save tight lines because it had been the longest running programme on Sky.
Yeah.
But I don't know this is 100%, but this is my understanding of it. Imagine you and I go out and play cards tonight at a casino, not that I'm a gambler, and lose all our money. And tomorrow morning we wake up with a hangover, real panic attack. What am I going to do? So you sell your fishing rods, whatever. Well, what I understand happened, BT Sport was launched, and Sky went up against BT Sport to bid for, I don't know if it was Premier League or Champions League rights, and Sky ended up bidding some horrendous amount.
I've heard this as well, actually.
I think it was something like 3-4 billion quid to win the rights. And obviously you can imagine BT Sport, new kid on the block, Sky can't have them knocking them off their perch. And then the next morning, they've done all this money, they've got to recoup somewhere. And that morning, I don't know if knee-jerk reaction, I'm sure there's some execs at Sky would correct me, but the next morning they axed 11 programmes, and Tight Lines sadly being one of them.
Really sad.
And what bugged me about it, what was a shame, was that when you watch Champions League night, you've got your anchor man, and then you've got about 3 pundits, Ruud Gullit, Alan Shearer, whoever the other one is, and I suspect they were paying each one of those probably about the amount it costs to produce tight lines each. So, why couldn't they have just, we just have 2 of you in there rather than 3? Because as a football fan, you watch that Champions League match because you want to see your team play, not because you want to hear what Glenn Hoddle's got to say. That's my view. Slightly biased, obviously, but it was a shame for fishing because Tight Lines did so much to promote fishing, and Keith did a great job.
He did, and it's never been replaced. So I guess like a programme like, Fisherman's Blues now, I mean, if people want that kind of information nowadays, they can't watch it through, Fisherman's Blues, I would imagine. How popular is that? Do you know how many listeners you get?
I don't get numbers, but what I say to people, where it must be popular is, like when we've got 2 hours, and people, when we used to have an hour, people said it wasn't enough, but I said, listen, how many sports are there that would love to have their own show on, and again, the biggest sports radio station in the world? So, the bosses at talkSPORT have told me they consider it part of talkSPORT's heritage. It's always been there and they want to keep it going. But, we do all we can to promote fishing. We promote, at the moment, women's angling. We promote as much, do everything we can to get kids into fishing. And, I think, it scratches that itch for a lot of people on a Sunday morning.
Are you formatting those shows yourself? Is it all through you, or are you?
It's all through me, and it's all seat of the pants, very harum-scarum. Like if you ask me if I've got any guests for tomorrow morning, I've got one lined up, but hopefully, I'm hoping that some people are at the Northern Angling Show, including your very own Matt Godfrey.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the Northern Angling Show is a bit dangerous because not only is it tiring being on your feet all day at the show, but some of them do tend to get led astray in hotel bars in the evening.
Really?
So,
did you know this, Tope?
I've been to a few shows and I've seen a few scenes.
Yeah,
that's all I'm willing to say on record.
Yeah,
so what happened? Because I came on your show a few months ago and it was great. I mean, it's different talking on but it's pretty much like a phone conversation.
Yeah,
isn't
exactly.
it? And it's nice and relaxed. What happens if somebody comes onto your show and they just completely freeze up? I mean, have you got a contingency to what to do?
Yeah, it's funny because you do that because you get a mixture. You get people who just, we encourage, phone in now, 08717 22 33 as long as it's got a fish in it, we want to hear from you. And you get people phoning out the blue with some lovely stories, really, from the old lady in Scotland who wants you to finish a crossword that's got a fishing question, to somebody who wants help, advice where to go fishing or take their son, or having trouble with all sorts of things. So you get great things like that, lovely stories from your listeners. But of course you also line up people occasionally like you with HS2. I said, let's have a chat about HS2, let's have a chat about the podcast. And it's funny because sometimes you'll speak to someone, say on a Friday afternoon, and have a great chat. You think, they'll be a good guest, and then like you say, when you get them on, they completely freeze. It's easy to forget. When you're probably the same for you now, you can forget that when the person comes in here and they sit down, they've got the headphones on, they can get really nervous.
You can see it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's different here because, they're obviously coming into a studio, and it's like that. Sometimes with the guests, when the headphones aren't on, it's fun and it's nice and relaxed. It's when they put those headphones on and you look at them and it's like ready to go, and then they go into this. And I think I would be the same if I was in that situation.
But it's funny this now because I'm thinking about it, like you and I sitting here now. There's the three of us in the room, and this hasn't been broadcast yet, so no one's listening. So there's no reason to be nervous. Whereas when you're live on the radio, everyone's listening. You're only a slip away. But
we're open to doing a live one, aren't we, Tope?
Well, I might need one of those dump buttons for you if we're going live.
Right, okay.
Yeah, that would be good. Well, for you, if I were you, I'd rather do it live because, you haven't got to edit it afterwards, have you? It's just done, wham, bam, that's it, you're finished. Whereas when I leave here, you've now got to do all your editing and what have you.
I think we could do a live one day. I think we could do
I'd like to do a live one with an audience.
Yeah, that would be good.
With an audience?
Seriously, I'd really like to do that.
The rugby programmes do that. Well, in fact, talkSPORT, Hawksby and Jacobs yesterday, in fact, I think it was Paul Hawksby and Matt. I'm not sure, but they did it. They did it in the George, one of my old local pubs in Twickenham.
It just sounds. It sounds real, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think
because what would be good about that is you can see the people and their reaction. Because it's funny. Sometimes you're in the talkSPORT studio, looking out the window. It's still dark, and you imagine if somebody snipped that lead, you wouldn't know. And you sometimes you're talking to thousands, possibly millions of people around the world because people listen online around the world. Yeah, if someone snipped that, you wouldn't know. Imagine like an April Fool's, and you come out the studio and they're all laughing at you, saying, Nigel, no one was listening because there's no difference. And I love that when you get messages. I get his name's not Olaf, but it's something like that. He's in the Ukraine and he listens from the Ukraine online, and he sends me messages. It's incredible. I used to get a bloke who was in Canada somewhere who just had a new baby. Wasn't an angler, but the time he was up with his baby, I was on, and he was decorating the baby's bedroom and that, and he'd send me messages, saying, "Oh, you're keeping me going." It's incredible.
Lovely. Yeah. No, you definitely have to think on your feet with those sorts of shit. Why did you say talkSPORT have always had fishing on there, but was it you wouldn't necessarily think, right, okay, when we're going to put a radio show based on talk, and that fishing would be top of the list? I mean, why did they? Have to
ask. I've never asked Keith Arthur how it came about, but Keith, I doubt if he signed up with them anymore. But when Keith was at Tight Lines, Keith, I've never had one, but Keith's agent was Barry Hearn.
Right.
Who, of course, is a keen fisherman and is the man behind Fishermania. Now, so Barry probably got him the gig at talkSPORT, I suspect, but I'll have to ask Keith that.
And see why they actually, because it's definitely you're putting information out there in a different sort of way,
and also it's interesting because I believe at the moment angling is Britain's 6th biggest participant sport. But of course, because for so long it was Britain's biggest participant sport, most people who don't know about fishing think it still is. So for all you know, when the boss is at talkSPORT, you imagine you haven't got a station yet, you've got 24 hours to fill. You think, right, what are we going to do? Right, people love racing, people love football, people love betting, people love a bit of boxing. Someone in that meeting probably said, what about fishing? It's Britain's biggest participant sport. So they say, right, let's give it 2 hours on a Sunday morning. Yeah. That's possibly it, but...
No, it's
not. I mean, Fisherman's Blues get mentioned in the book, but not how it started. So, but you'll enjoy it. There's a good history of talkSPORT there.
No, we'd like to have a look through that. That'd be great. So I wish we had this book actually before the podcast. I could have done a little bit more research actually, Nigel, about talkSPORT.
I don't think it would have helped you.
There's
more stories of sort of, Alan Brazil going AWOL and what have you. If I mention...
What is Alan Brazil like?
When I speak to anybody I bump into, that's all they want to know about Alan Brazil. I don't see him very often because, he's on weekday mornings. And, I mean, he's unbelievable. I mean... He's one. I used to work with a photographer many years ago, been in the Navy, and, he was a drinker. And he always used to say, like, I treat every day as if it might be my last. He'd never say, no, I'm not going to have another drink. I've got to be up in the morning, And he lived till he was 80 odd, Gordon. And I think Alan Brazil's got that same outlook on life. Just live it. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't do it. I couldn't comprehend doing it. But and I don't even get hangovers. I've never, I hardly ever drink. When I went to Paris with the rugby team I coached the other week, I drank Pernod for the first time in probably 25 years, did a bit of bar diving even, and I was fine the next morning. And I remember once I was playing rugby, me and my mate Kevin, we trained really hard all summer. I hadn't had a drink. We'd been swimming in the mornings, we'd been going to gym, training really hard for the new season. And just before the season started, we went to meet some friends for a drink, and it was like Twickenham Green, lovely summer's afternoon, and Rolling Rock it was that summer, it'd been mid-90s, and we're like on about our 6th bottle of Rolling Rock, really cold, and we looked at each other, we said, have we got this wrong? We could have been doing this all summer. But it wouldn't have tasted the same if you had been doing it. But how Alan Brazil does it, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, he likes his red wine.
But he's the voice,
he likes his Guinness. He's got a great broadcasting voice. And interestingly, I'm trying to track him down because he mentioned on his show the other day that Ali McCoist had been in Patagonia fishing.
Oh, has he?
So I'm going to try and get him as a guest on the show to talk about it. But
actually, going back to your guests on the show, then, have you got anyone that you've not had on the show that you'd like fishing guests to come on?
Good question. Can't think of anyone off the top of my head. There's lots who have escaped. I used to ask Danny. I used to ask Danny in the early days, but I don't suppose he still is. But he said, "No, I'm clubbing." Does he still go clubbing?
Yeah, he does, doesn't he? Yeah.
Crikey, yeah. So
yeah, Ibiza in the summer.
So he's not going to be up at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning then.
He might be fishing somewhere.
Yeah, that's true.
Is Danny not came on the show?
No, I've had Ali, Spoons, Dovey. Yeah. Not had. Actually, I tell you, I would like to go, and I mentioned this to you, Tobe.
Oh yeah.
After listening to Damo on the Thinking Tackle,
what do you reckon, Tobe?
I'll have to. We'd have to. I think we should. Like we said, we'd come on together.
Yeah.
I think we'd have good fun with that.
Well, we could have a team effort that you two and Dad could all come up. That'd be great. Because something that really interested me was your dad spoke about it, and so did Dovey. Now, you can have conversations with anglers on the bank all day long about moon phases, and you don't come to any conclusions. But when you hear your dad talking moon phases and Dovey talking moon phases with such conviction, I've always been convinced of it. I've never quite understood it. When I used to go to Norfolk pike fishing, you sat on that river, the River Bure, and if you wanted some roach bait, you couldn't catch them all day. The tide turned, and when that tide turned and they started running, it'd be a roach every chuck. Now, who can say why? And it's the same as, I do quite a lot of sea fishing. You're catching, the tide turns, bang, they switch off. Yeah. And it's the same as, again, going back to swimming. When I used to live, I had a house in Hampton where I had quite a long garden, and my shed was at the bottom, and I kept my old mountain bike in, and I used to go swimming every morning. And I had about 6 different bird feeders in the garden. And by my back door, I had the bucket with all the bird food. So on my way down to get the bike, I'd carry the bucket and I'd fill up all the feeders, get my bike, cycle round to Hampton Pool, swim a mile, come back. I've been gone less than an hour. Some mornings, every bird feeder was empty. Other mornings, they hadn't been touched. And you couldn't put your finger on it. But that's nature, isn't it? And on the days they hadn't been touched, if I was going fishing that day, I'd be really worried. I'd think, oh, they're not having it today.
Yeah, I've noticed that with having animals at home, that when there's been full moons, they've just acted differently.
Yeah.
And I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but Jason keeps going on about this at work. He'll have a restless night, and he'll wake up the next day and say to his girlfriend, "Did you ever?" And he said, "It seems to fall on a full moon. It's like it's very strange." Yeah.
Oh no.
And I think there are times when probably there are full moons, and we're not necessarily taking too much notice of that. But the tide thing is just. But you do want to speak to Damo about that because. Yeah, he's got some interesting views on moon phases, which maybe have come to light more recently as well. And I know he's planning some fishing trips this year.
Well, that's it. When
around
somebody like him,
phases, so
busy job he's got, family, etc., to book your fishing trips around it shows how convinced he is.
Yeah. I mean, if you've only got a couple of weeks of the year or whatever to go fishing, you want to give yourself the best possible chance. Obviously,
that's when I went freelance was when I first started looking into it, because I used to think, I work 6 days a week, I'm going fishing. I don't want anyone to tell me I'm wasting my time, because as a fisherman, you've got to be an optimist, haven't you? And I'm going fishing. I don't want anyone to tell me, the moon's wrong or whatever. But I remember once I knew a guy called Steve Gray who was really into it. And I used to fish this lake, and you wake up in the morning, you haven't had a take, you think you're not going to catch, once sort of first lights, that usual, hour before dawn, hour after dawn, you're expecting a take. And I used to pack up, just about miss the traffic, so I'd be leaving the lake 9:30. And I remember speaking to him, and he said, "You going fishing this week?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going on Tuesday." He said, "Let me have a look." And he said 11 o'clock or whatever time it was, and I'm going to pack up about 9:30. And I just remembered what he said to me, and I thought, no, I'll wait. And I always do it anyway. Whenever I get a take, whether I'm pike fishing, barbel fishing, carp fishing, either as I'm running to the rod or as I strike or as I'm playing the fish, I always look at my watch and see what time it is, just to see if there is a bite time. I'll never forget, picked up the rod, looked and watched it, it was bang on 11 o'clock.
Was it?
Now, that wasn't conclusive enough, because if I'd have done that 10 times running, but I mean, it might be bite time and you've got the wrong bait on or your rig's in the wrong place, but, it still made me think, I thought, blimey, it's like...
Yeah, if it's worth once, you probably want to get in contact him more often and ask him... Nigel, it's been a great podcast. I was going to say to you, actually, before we wrap this up, can you just sign this embryo? Right.
Of course I can.
We better say this now. This calendar...
Looks nice.
It's the embryo cover, which we're getting all the guests on the podcast to sign. This is supposed to be at the Northern Angling Show at the weekend. We've had a few problems. So what we're going to do is carry on getting the guests to sign this. We're going to get a lot more signatures, and rather than auction it at the embryo at the Northern Show, we're going to auction it online or do something later in the year and get it framed and do it all properly.
Happy to support it, although its value might go down with my name on it.
No, our names are on there now.
Mine and Simon's in the top corner, so
we've already knocked a few grand off. So.
Yeah, I'll happily sign it. It's a great cause. I love what MBO's doing. I love the look of those lakes as well.
They're looking good, aren't they?
Yeah, no, I have to get out there and check those out.
Yeah, we might get out to some of those lakes later in the year, actually, and that's great, Nigel. Thank you.
I might come with you.
Well, if you fancy a trip, actually.
Yeah, I'd love to.
We are sorting a trip out, so yeah. Any fishing plans coming up in the future?
Oh, nightmare. Flooded rivers. I was supposed to be barbel fishing on the River Wye on Tuesday. The following Tuesday, I was supposed to be, still got an outside chance, first day of the salmon season on the Wye, try and catch that springer. I'd love to catch a big springer. Yeah. That would make my decade. But and then March 14th, when the rivers finish, I don't think I'm going to get a chance to fish the rivers, for roach before then. My syndicate runs till the end of March, so I'll have 2 weeks carp fishing, which I'm really, really looking forward to.
Right, excellent. I was going to say to you, actually, we will wrap it up now. If there was, is there anywhere, the Monster Carp guys, they're doing all this filming around the world. We're trying to find carp in different countries. Are there any countries that spring to mind that you think, you want to try there that they haven't necessarily filmed up before?
There were carp in Kazakhstan. I did catch one about 30 pound on a spinner, fun enough, when I was trying to catch asp for live bait.
Right.
But logistically, I don't think you'd want to go there.
No, there must be other locations out there. We're talking about the States and...
Well, I'm going to say, I've caught carp all over the States and Canada.
But it's finding those elusive big uns, isn't it? That not so easy to find, are they? In those countries?
I never found them, and I never found actual evidence of them. You'll hear every barroom story of them. Every fisherman you meet will tell you about them, but I've never seen a photo of one. I just don't think they grow that big there. I think it's cold for too long in the winter.
So you think maybe like Eastern Europe is still probably the
holy
countries
grail,
looking for Eastern European lakes at the moment.
Yeah, and of course, the great thing about that is, as you boys here know better than anything, it's opened up a whole new market for fishing tackle, hasn't it?
It has.
And of course, through that, you've got all your contacts. You've got your team Romania, your team Hungary, and they're all happy to sort of help out Korda. So you've got the best sort of network you could possibly have. I envy Korda for it.
Still growing.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Nigel, it's been a great podcast. Enjoyed it. I love those stories. A little bit different to what we've had on before, which we want to give the guests the listeners and viewers some variety, and I think they've had that variety on this podcast.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Well done.
Thank you for coming on the show.
The Thinking Tackle Podcast.